When we look at a snapshot of the present moment, it seems that everything is the way it is because it was meant to be this way. This is normal. There can be nothing else. The past was inevitable. But if you study history, or indeed just look around you with open eyes, you realize how much we are shaped by accident and circumstance. Take the game of cricket, for example. This is a game traditionally played over 5 freaking days. When the one-day version of it was invented, purists sneered. Those same purists would be aghast if any other sport they followed, like football or tennis, was played over an entire day. But we take these forms for granted. We also take the way cricket is played as the only way it could be played. And yet, through the evolution of cricket, it often looked like a completely different game. Underarm bowling was the norm once, with overarm bowling legalized only in 1864. Cricket was once super popular in the USA, played in 125 cities over 22 states, and even Abraham Lincoln would watch cricket matches. There was a time when batsmen batted either on the front foot or the back foot, never both, until W.G. Grace blew everybody's minds by being able to do both. It must have felt as weird at the time as batting both left-handed and right-handed would be today. There was also a time where all the fielders would be placed on the offside and it would be considered rude to hit a ball on the leg side. So much so that a batsman would apologize if he accidentally did so. Ranjit Singh ji was a pioneer who bucked convention and changed this. My point is that when you take a close look at the history of the game, you realize that you should hold your horses on what is right or wrong or normal or abnormal and how something should be done. We can draw the same lesson outside of cricket as well. The world is complex, everything depends, history is a wild ride. What fun.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Varma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest today is Tim Wigmore, a British cricket journalist who's written a number of excellent books about cricket and sport, most recently an ambitious book named Test Cricket, A History. The best books about sport are always about more than sport. To invoke C.L.R. James, they go beyond a boundary. Tim's book achieves exactly that, and you will find in it not just cricket but history, sociology, politics, economics, the human condition itself. The book isn't just filled with narratives that will delight any cricket geek as it is, but it is also a chronicle of a changing society. We will hear about how class and race played a huge part in cricket politics, how the game grew in some places and died in others, and how a changing world led to a changing game. It's a wonderful book, but we didn't just talk about this book, but Tim's life as a cricket writer and his other books, including Cricket 2.0, which is about the T20 revolution. Those of you who follow my work will know that many years ago, I was commissioned to write a book on cricket strategy and what we learned from T20 cricket. Now, though I had written many columns on it, some of which are linked from these show notes, I never quite wrote the book. While I had aimed to write a strategic guidebook for the T20 revolution, Tim's written a chronicle of it, and a great chronicle. It was so much fun chatting with him about that as well. We had a good, pleasant, freewheeling conversation, and if you like cricket, you will love it. If you don't like cricket, you will love it. You are that kind of listener, and I love your attitude. But before we begin, let's take a quick commercial break. Hey, the music started and this sounds like a commercial, but it isn't. It's a plea from me to check out my latest labor of love, a YouTube show I am co-hosting with my good friend, the brilliant Ajay Shah. We've called it Everything is Everything. Every week, we'll speak for about an hour on things we care about, from the profound to the profane, from the exalted to the everyday. We range widely across subjects and we bring multiple frames with which we try to understand the world. Please join us on our journey and please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. The show is called Everything is Everything. Please do check it out. Tim, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
Thank you so much for having me, Amit. Really looking forward to this chat.
I want to start off with a hypothetical question I ask sometimes in different contexts, which is about what would happen if you reboot civilization. And here's how it goes in the context of sport. Let's say you have humanity and you reboot civilization and every sport has to evolve from scratch. And the question therefore is, which sports evolve just the way they are and which sports don't? And the idea behind the question obviously is to figure out which are so fundamental and primal that they're going to evolve anyway, and which are just such weird accidents that they can't possibly happen again. And my theory is that something like football is just always going to happen. It's a round object being kicked around, and there'll always be some form of it. And something like cricket can't possibly happen because it is just so madly idiosyncratic in so many different ways. So, what's your take on this? Do you think cricket would evolve? If so, or if not, why?
Well, I definitely agree about football. So in the Middle Ages in Britain, you have people kicking around a pig's bladder and stuff, and it's sort of half, we can half recognise that game with what football is today. So there's a simplicity to it. With cricket, though, what I would say is that you do get in various different cultures, you do get a bat and a ball game of sorts. So I would say, if you're replaying the universe 1,000 times, you get probably, 600-700 times you get a really popular bat and ball game. Obviously, we have baseball as well as cricket. You probably only get cricket in its current form once or twice because it's such a strange game, the idiosyncrasies. But there is something actually, a bat and ball is quite universal actually, and look, if you play cricket in a different country or whatever, people can't recognize it, but they do sort of understand the concept of hitting a ball with a bat, right? So there's something there, but in terms of getting an LBW rule, that probably is 1 in 1,000.
I'm also interested in sort of, understanding what impact the times have on cricket. Like, first of all, cricket is deeply unusual in the sense that we almost take it for granted. So many people call themselves test tragics and, are purist about it. And I'm so delighted your wonderful book, which I love, by the way, has actually come out. When I was a kid, I remember growing up in the 1980s with this edition of Bill Frindle's Wisden Book of Test Cricket, which had every scorecard up till 1977, and I would just look at all those scorecards and fantasize the stories behind each of the matches, and it was just such a different universe. But what we often don't accept is that cricket is so bloody unusual in terms of the length. There is no other sport like it. Like when people mock T20 cricket, for example, for being abbreviated and not being the real thing, I point out that, hey, T20 cricket takes so many hours to play. It is way longer than a game of football. If a game of football was played over 5 days, people would just go mad. It would make absolutely no sense. There's nothing that's played out over so many days, and we've normalized test cricket, so we compare everything to that. But there's no intrinsic reason that anything has to be that long. And what allowed it to be so long in an earlier time is that the opportunity cost was low. People didn't have shit to do. There was no internet, there was no television. How are you going to entertain yourself? How are you going to play? At one point in your book, you have this lovely sentence, rhythms of test cricket were ideally suited to radio, doubling as a background noise to a working day. And I read that and it strikes me that therefore it is an anachronism. Therefore, I can't imagine anybody watching test cricket or even the shorter forms of the game in the modern time. Like, following the IPL is basically giving away your entire evenings in India for a couple of months. It just makes so little sense. So, in that regard, what is your sense of cricket? Isn't it deeply unusual that something that is played over 5 days in this manner evolves? And is it therefore still relevant? Will it be around 100 years from now?
Lots of layers to that question. So one of the reasons this game lasts so long is if you think about when it starts, you have Australia and England, and you have the boat takes a month to get from. It's crazy. So you're not going to go there and play a couple of games that are short games. So at that time you have the evolution of football, which is really in north of England, and clearly you can make a trip in an afternoon. So as a 90-minute game, that's perfect. But if you're going to if you're going to get the boat somewhere, and it takes a month, you might as well stay there for 6 months, because these tours are run. These are profit-sharing enterprises, from the very start. And one of the lovely stories in the book, the very first test match is the culmination of a long tour from England to Australia and New Zealand. And England only take 12 people because this is a profit-sharing tour. So the more people you take, actually that dilutes the profit. So you have as many people as possible. And by the time of the first, what is now the first test, one of England's players is literally in prison in New Zealand because he'd got in a brawl. So England left with 11 men left to pick. So there is no tension with who to pick, because you are picking the 11 standing. So those distances is a big part of why the game evolved as it did. Remember, we've had timeless tests. There's a 1939 test, England in South Africa, which is 9 days, and England are on course to chase 600, and then they have to leave to take the boat. So it's called a draw. So this the time it's a very peculiar part of cricket, because 100 years ago, the Ashes in England, you would have every test would be only 3 days, and you get all these pretty underwhelming draws, and then the last test would be a timeless test. So you have these inconsistencies. This is very intrinsic in cricket. You have these inconsistencies that are built into the game. And in terms of take that up to today, well, I think people who like test, I think test cricket, for me, it has a kind of economic big challenge, which is almost like it's almost a free rider problem, that a lot of people, you quoted the kind of radio line about the soundtrack to people's lives, and I know so many people who they're at work and they love having a sneaky ear with the cricket on, or even just a sly tab at work, and they are following it, but economically they're not necessarily contributing to it, to its livelihood. And I suppose I would always say, actually, most people who go to a ticket to a T20 game of T20 cricket, if you say you're paying, $20 or whatever, $3 or $4 is actually going to be used to subsidize this other format, just as if you go to a musical, a bit of your ticket is used to subsidize a Shakespeare show or whatever. I think most people are actually quite happy with that arrangement. So that's so there's a value that people ascribe to it, which they don't necessarily meet in their demand, because who has time to take off a lot of, you go to game on weekends, but to take off multiple days of your holiday, your very precious holiday leave to go to your test matches is difficult to do, but you might still really value it, which is why you have all these great test matches in the past. And I was digging into, as you can imagine, some rabbit holes on YouTube, and often you're just like, where are all these people in the crowd? But they said this was a sellout, and there's all these empty seats and stuff. So that's that weirdness to the game. And in terms of, so I think there is still, people do really value this thing. And the players I talked to, they value it massively highly. And you need administrators to, I think, have a little bit more, who have vision. I said one of the things reading the book, you learn cricket's always been run terribly, abjectly, and we have so many, sliding doors moments that were missed. And for me, one of the biggest is 1909. You have the first version of, the ICC is formed, but the first word is imperial. So you have to be part of the British Empire to be a member, and that excludes USA and Argentina, who were both totally two of the top 5 countries in the world at that point. And that was a real sliding doors moment. And we see these missed chances really again and again in cricket.
I also want to get a sense of how do people follow the sport, right? Because how I followed the sport growing up in the 1980s was really, really different from how I follow it today. My older friends tell me about how they could only follow it in the 60s and 70s on the radio. So you would have to imagine what kind of cover drive Sunil Gavaskar is playing, or the way a fast bowler is bowling. And so everything is happening in your imagination. And then I grew up with first black and white television, and then color television coming in, but later in the 80s, and then you have satellite TV in the 90s. And we follow it in a very different way. And a question I often ask historians is that when you write about a particular period of time, as you have written about the 19th century, the 20th century, and very briefly about even earlier than that, how do you get a sense of what it was in that moment? What did sport mean to people? How did they follow the sport? How did they know the players? How did they imagine them? Give me a sense of that.
So the players are often seen as characters and as caricatures, because you can't see them. They're not flesh really to you, that they're exaggerated, and often the quality of of photographs is developing in the early stages of Test cricket. So you have photographs, but you also have cartoons of these people, which kind of which almost caricatures, which brings them to life. And there's a sort of license that people have when covering cricket, which, Neville Card is one of the great cricket writers, but he did. We know at times he basically made things up. He would describe matches and moments that he wasn't there and things, and of course people would be playing these beautiful shots because in his mind's eye, that was always perfect. And actually, for the very first major cricket, one of the first major cricket broadcasts, so Australia in 1930 sent broadcasters to England for the Ashes, and this is Bradman's breakthrough. This when he becomes this absolute megastar, and they so these broadcasters, but they have this weird system. So basically, there's cables that are sent back from England to Australia, and the Australian broadcasters, they decipher these cables, and they're sent in code. So a code will tell you that there's been 2 runs here, or whatever. And that's all the information they have, right? And then they're saying, oh, he's got 2 runs from a cover drive here. He's got 2 runs from a leg glance here. So they are kind of making things up on the fly. But it's all part of the charm because it's telling a story. It's not actually a true story. It's just faithful to who's playing and how they do numerically, but it's not actually telling you more information. So you're they're crafting a story out of that. And of course, there's the weird thing in that, however big a Test fan you are, if you have, you're not really going to watch every ball of a Test match. Even listening will be a bit of a challenge. So there's this kind of charming aspect where this thing is going on, and your life is weaving around it. And actually, that's why a lot of people, they can place Test matches and Test series, because Test series, that is historic. That's lasting 2 or 3 months, because they used to have long gaps between matches. So that could be when you had a coming of age, some whatever, and you associate it with this cricket. So there is that kind of magical aspect to it, where it is very much the sort of background noise of people's lives. And also, I think people, if you like Test cricket, you do understand that there is, in a way, that the kind of boring bits, if you like, are necessary for the good bits to be as good as they are. It's a bit of a trade-off, and you have the kind of intensity all the time. Then it doesn't actually. Then when you get those great moments, they're actually diluted. And I think people like that it has there's a crescendo to it, and it has these rhythms. And also people, sometimes you can have a session where, maybe 50 runs are scored and only one wicket, but the the bowling's been terrific and the batsmen have dug in really well. And people can still appreciate that, and they can appreciate a wham bam session as well. So it has a really, I think, a full spectrum. And I guess you can appreciate different bits for different passages of play, for different aspects of the play that they reveal. And I think one of the other great things is when you have these great contrasts, which bring out, and one of the, to use an Indian example recently, one of my favorite partnerships really is when you have Cheteshwar Pujara batting with Rishabh Pant. So you have 2 guys there who are both criticised from the opposite spectrum for their rate of scoring, for their respective attitudes to risk, which is, Pujara being too afraid of risk, Pant embracing it too much. And so they're both kind of have been criticised in different ways, but they both have had this incredible kind of almost, a self-confident and a bloody mindedness to say, actually, this is what works for me. And this is because Test cricket is a game for all sorts. And then you have these great partnerships. And I think the line, at the Gabba 2021, when India have that famous victory against Australia, is that you have Pujara, who's batting for a draw at one end, and you have Pant at the other end, who's batting for the victory. So you get this whole stylistic range, and even you have a left and right hander there. So you have it's a lovely contrast there, and that's a great thing. So you can have, a great partnership can be complementary players or contrasting players, and they can still complement each other in all these different ways. I think that's quite a special game to be able to have that, because I think the ways to be good at Test cricket, there's so many different ways. In T20, which I do love T20 as well, but as a batsman, there are slightly fewer ways to be good at it, because if you're a Pujara type, well, you're actually just not going to play the game.
Another way in which cricket is different from all the other major sports is, as you point out in the first chapter of the book, is that it evolved into really being played at the highest level between countries. There was never a sort of a long-standing club format as such. The mythology of the game is all, England and Australia playing the first test match, and then one by one other test sides come, as you've sort of outlined in your book. And that's the whole game. And today we won't look back on a legendary county match of 1788, for example, or 1894 or whatever, right? And that feels, in a sense, also an accident of history because, as you point out, the place where you could really make the money back in the day was playing in the Lancashire League or was playing county cricket or was playing that kind of local game, which means that's what people went to see. That's where the money was. And part of the reason, of course, why money went out of international cricket is the oppressive role that the boards, played once they were formed in the early 20th century. But what is kind of the reason for that? Because you look at any other sport like football or just any other sport, it's all about clubs. There's a lot more competition, whereas here it's just about the Cricket World Cup is much bigger in cricket than any other World Cup in any other sport. So is there a sense of it being inevitable, or again did accidents of history play a part in this?
No, it's a really, really good question, because when you look at the sort of structure of cricket, it is very unusual. So you have football is American football is a one extreme where you have no international game to speak of. But if you have football is a game where something like 80% of revenue comes from club v club matches, and cricket until the IPL, which we might talk about later, but as of say 2005 would have been 80 or 90, probably 95% of revenue came from nation v nation contests. So completely different way of running a sport. So why did that happen? Well, partly it is what we talked about, the accent of where it's played, which is why you have the England-Australia thing. As in, to make that work, you need to play a lot of matches, and you need to frame it around that nation v nation. The kind of the colonial aspect is integral to this explanation as well, because for England, it's cricket is seen as, Bailey, actually, who invents the ICC in 1909, he sees cricket as a tool of maintaining the empire, strengthening ties and everything. And then the flip side of that is, of course, is for for countries in the empire against their will, then cricket becomes a force of showing their own standing in the world. So then the prestige of beating England, which is something that all test nations really share, that desire to beat England. So that helps to put this game on this weird course. And then you also have, in some ways, that you have the establishment. So the MCC might have been the club who run laws. Well, they are an incredibly establishment organization, and they are very resistant to a game that's structured more like football, say, in terms of the Lancashire League model and stuff. And so there are a few sliding doors moments where Lancashire League, which would have all these great players, great West Indies players, great India players who would play as professionals. One kind of potential sliding doors moment is you could have had that kind of is rolled out nationally, and it replaces county cricket, and it becomes like the football league, and that doesn't happen. But I think the colonial aspect is central to why you have the nation v nation aspect. And at a certain point, a game develops its own myth, right? And so with the Ashes, that becomes so central to the conception of cricket that that others want. That people want to watch it, and it becomes the pinnacle event. But I should say, the 1920s and stuff, you still have people complaining that there's too much international cricket in England, even though there's very little compared to now. You have people who want regular summers with no international cricket, and people worried about is this hurting the county game and stuff. So you have these perennial club v country contests in cricket. And obviously, you do again now with the the IPL and the whole world of franchise cricket. But But these country debates now, and there's a new dimension to them. But the essence of the debate is not new at all. We 100 years ago, West Indies players would miss matches for West Indies, Leary Constantine and so on, because they could earn more playing in the Lancashire League. So yeah, it's just a new dimension of an old problem, I guess.
There's another broader question I have about sport in general, but it applies to cricket as well, which is how we take for granted that there is a sport and there is an association at the national level, like the ECB in England or the BCCI here, and there is an international organization, the ICC, which, as you've pointed out, was called the Imperial Cricket Conference, and you've quipped how it was more imperial than cricket in the early days, and that was one of the defining factors. But from an economics point of view, this has always seemed such a bad way for something to get set up, because then this association, whether it is a national association like the BCCI or the ICC or FIFA for football or whatever, is effectively both a monopoly and a monopsony. They are the only people who are allowed to present football to the world, and at the same time they are the only buyers of the services of the players, and the players often have no choice and they have to go along with them. And the result is that there simply isn't a competition for talent, there isn't a competition to establish best practices, any of those things you would imagine in a marketplace, and therefore you have the sort of racism that goes on with the South Africa board, or other kinds of discrimination, like the discrimination between amateurs and professionals that goes on in various countries, like England and New Zealand, like the stuff that goes down in West Indies, for example. And I just wonder about this structure, because everyone just takes it for granted, and as if this is the way it should be. Like, of course there is a sport, and of course there is one organization, and any rebellion is bad. You have a great chapter on Kerry Packer on the World Series, and I think that is an awesome challenge to make against a system like this. Like, why should only, say, the Australian Cricket Board have the right to put out a team that plays for Australia? How does that happen? Fine, that's an early custom that gets established, but what justifies it? Why can't Kerry Packer do it? Why can't you and I do it if we really feel like it? If you and I were to put up a team that goes under the name Australia, it wouldn't be very credible. But then why not, let different people compete? And of course, the World Series thing is actually doing really well, but then Packer gets pretty much the deal that he wants. As you point out, he made the lion's share of the profits, so why should he continue? Might as well take over the system than break it down. But how does one think about this? Because this is really a problem with every sport, and you could say, okay, the different sports compete with each other, but if my only skill is as a cricketer, I'm kind of screwed. The IPL is a nice little artificial setup within this, which to some extent mimics a market, and therefore you have some competition where the Bangalore franchise and the Delhi franchise and the Chennai franchise are all looking for the best cricketers, and that is kind of good, but it is still under the umbrella of the BCCI, and that overall sporting problem which assails every sport remains. So, how should one think about this?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, because it goes to the heart of what was early Test cricket. Well, there was no such thing as early Test cricket, because you would have these private tours. You'd have multiple private tours in some cases at the same time, concurrently, in either England or Australia, by teams from that other country. By, in England 11 and Australian 11, they would say they're England. They would say they're Australia. You would also have, it was just a marketing, basically the idea of tests, it's a marketing slogan, which becomes popular as a marketing slogan. And so you have this bizarre situation where what we think of tests is actually, it only begins to be, it's 1894, an Australian journalist, he retrospectively classifies, bit idiosyncratically in some cases, which matches constitute test matches and which don't. And you have, very famous Australian victory against the MCC 1878, which is seen as pivotal. Well, that's actually just not considered a test, even though, some think of that as one of the most important early games of cricket, for example. And so you have this... it's bizarre. So with W.G. Grace, obviously such a famous cricketer, he only plays 2 of the first 13 matches that are test matches, because he wouldn't have known what's what at the time, and in many cases, he's not going on these tours if he's not being paid enough, and it doesn't appeal to him. So yeah, cricket has always had this. And there has been, there was the Lancashire Leagues has won. You have Julian Khan creates this sort of private traveling team. I guess a bit like the Harlem Globetrotters would be a comparison in the 1930s, when again he peels off cricketers. Lots of New Zealand cricketers go there because they can't really earn anything in New Zealand. And then you have World Series cricket. You obviously have the Indian Cricket League, the forerunner to the IPL, which was had a brief, formed in 2007, has a brief existence. So you do get these attempts, and you always get these rumours actually that something will give nowadays. But the official boards, they have been pretty, fairly ruthless actually, in terms of working with each other, working with broadcasters, and yeah, they've been fairly ruthless at clamping down on rivals, and yeah, there have been. I mean, if Packer had, as you said, Packer kind of got what he wanted, but he could have torn the whole thing up, but he doesn't. He doesn't choose to, because he ends up in 1979. He gets the rights that he wants, and he becomes. Yeah, he gets a profit share basically. So he gets a better deal than he'd wanted a few years before. So he realizes, actually the other thing. Yeah, but Packer realizes that by working with the Australian board, in a way, he can get what he wants, but because he's got the stamp of being official, it's actually often used as a device to pay players less than they could have got on a completely free marketplace, because people want to play in the official Ashes, and it has that thing. And there's that quote from an Australian administrator, who cares if we lose 11 players? I've got 500,000 Aussies who are desperate to play test matches. And he's kind of wrong in that people do follow World Series cricket, but the mythology actually, I suppose every year you have the official structure survives. It probably becomes a little bit harder to erode, because that history is a little bit stronger. And as you said, the IPL, of course, is completely working with the system. Really, it's not a insurgent league who's peeling off, who's signing, off making offer to Jasprit Bumrah that happens for a league that's during the India England series. That is not happening. So you have the situation where the structure is able to kind of, well, they adapt, and they do so in a way that more or less the establishment that's what they want over time. That's a that's a kind of a common theme. And what the establishment wants, of course, is often not in the best interest of the sport. So we can talk about there how the USA Argentina, that early moment, also the way cricket is used continually and appallingly as a way to enforce rigid oppression on race and class lines, which happens again and again. So we have West Indies have no black captain with tenure until 1960. And we have England have this divide between amateurs and professionals to 1952, where they keep on picking amateurs as captain who are a lot less good. And it's amazing how this actually hurts the team, which is so they are actually, the MCC is basically happy to say, we are happy to lose more. Well, their trade-off with themselves is we would rather lose more matches and pick players we want from the right social standing, in inverted commas. And so the average in the first 10 tours of the MCC run to Australia, so from 1903 to 1951, so the average from all England captains in those 50 test matches is 22 with the bat, top score of 79. So they don't, so on average, your captain's not even worth his place in the side. And that is the price that they're happy to pay in order to have often basically an aristocrat as their captain.
Look, I gotta tell you gotta stop complaining about your captains, because in our early days, we had the Maharajas of Porbandar and Patiala, so just chill. Compared to those guys, your captains were positively Bradman-esque. So let's talk about you. Let's talk about how you fell in love with cricket. You dedicate your book to your dad, and you say he inspired your love for Test cricket. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about, how you got into cricket and the rabbit holes it took you down on early on.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess fairly typically, a lot of people. Yeah, it comes in the family. Well, from my dad's side, I should say. My mum is Polish, so she still thinks of this as this bloody alien language, all the algebra and stuff. I think she has read this book. She hadn't read any of my previous ones, but she's found this one. I think because it's got enough of the kind of broader stuff, so she's found it more accessible, which is good. And yeah, I think what, from a journalistic point of view, what's interested me in cricket, and the great thing about cricket is you have the game itself, the bat and the ball, which are very interesting, and you have actually there's layers and layers and layers that explain what happens with the bat and the ball when you kind of step off the field, and it really can be a prism to explore almost the whole world in many cases, and that is, it's a fascinating thing that we you could look at it in a very narrow way, but actually to really understand what's happening, it's touching on, you need to understand economics, race, class, everything, to begin to understand actually how do these forces, how do they play out. And I find that is I suppose a lot of sports you can do that, but I suppose the history of Test cricket lends itself especially to that, I think. So there is so many, it's both a mirror to the outside world, and it can sometimes even shape what happens in that world. We see that with Basil D'Oliveira, and so when South Africa are banned for apartheid policies from 1970, I think that is a contributory factor. You don't know how much weight to assign it, right? But I think that's definitely bad for the regime in South Africa, and it's a minor contributory factor to, I think, the end of apartheid. So you have actually cricket is playing an outsized role relative to this silly game with a bat and a ball.
As CLR James said, what do they know of cricket? Who only cricket know? And there are two ways one can arrive at being a cricket journalist. And one is that you become a journalist or you become a writer and you are interested in many things, and cricket just happens to be the one that you take up, and everything is everything. So it fits in. And the other is that you're a cricket obsessive, and it is a completely natural thing to do, to want to just write about cricket, and then you expand from there. So what was your journey like? Like, did you want to be a writer or a journalist, or was it an accident? What did you grow up wanting to be? Did you play cricket at any kind of serious level at any point? Give me a sense of your journey to here.
So on the spectrum, I'd probably be kind of halfway in the middle. That I always wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a journalist more than I wanted to be a cricket journalist. Just from being a kid, I think I just loved loved learning about the world. Had that kind of that curiosity that tends you to ask annoying questions, which is intrinsic to being a journalist, and the kind of wanting to get the why. And then I was a very modest cricket player. Played sort of second team for my school, second or third team at times, and I played for a club and things, but was not a very good player. But enjoyed playing, although it's a tough game when you don't get many runs and you bat first, and you're kind of you're kind of left sulking for the day. So it does give you a tiny sense of how cruel it is, and obviously that just magnifies it. That just multiplies and multiplies as you get to a much higher levels than I've ever got. And then I sort of started off in political journalism, but while juggling some cricket freelancing, and then opportunities opened up, and I went down the role of cricket. But I think my actual early journalism in politics actually was being very useful, and it's actually informed and improved my writing in cricket. My writing in sport to have a bit of non-sport experience, I think is really useful, because you get a little bit more sense of where this game fits into the world more broadly. And that's a challenge, I guess, as when you specialize in a topic. It's obviously you get a lot of knowledge of a topic, which is great, but you need to actually have an outsider's view as well, because sometimes actually outsider's view allows you to. Sometimes there's these received things in cricket or whatever that you're covering, that because you're in it, you think this is how it is, but then you need someone to ask a stupid question sometimes, right? And actually, so I try and do that sometimes. Just think, actually, you take a step back, like the club v country thing we talked about before. Actually, cricket is very weird compared to every other sport and how it's run. So, rather than think that this is because it is, actually, why is that the case? I think that's something that's very interesting to do. And I think actually probably in any field, it's like, being able to take a step back is really important. So it's ideally you want to combine a speciality and expertise in the field, but with a sense of where it fits in more broadly. And what are the unusual things about it, because they will lend themselves to more interesting writing.
Just before we started recording, we were chatting about our mutual friend Rahul Bhattacharya, who was my colleague at Wisden and then Cricinfo in the early 2000s. And I would constantly tell him in those days, and tell all the young people who kind of worked with me, that, look at all the writers in England, while they're in their 20s, they start writing books, and then they write many books through their career. And in India, somehow that ambition was never there among journalists. So I would, keep telling these guys that write some books. And Rahul, of course, started with Pandits from Pakistan, and just a magnificent book. How did you come about to the idea of writing books? Was it a sense of, this is the kind of thing that now that I've started on this journey, I see other writers around me have written books or are writing books, so I should also do it? Or did you inherently want to write books anyway, and it was just a natural part of that progression? And who were sort of your role models? What kind of books did you see yourself writing? Like, were they more the journalistic sort, or were they analytical, or were they, this latest one, of course, is a sweeping book, which is almost a work of history in a sense. So give me a sense of how you began to think about it. And also, I noticed that most of your books before this, if not all of them, are co-written with someone else.
They're all co-written.
They're all co-written. So what was that decision like? Was it like a commitment device that if I have a co-writer, the damn thing will get done? Or, how did that play out? Take me through your journey as a book writer.
So the journalism I always enjoy doing the most is, long, in depth, when you feel you've kind of got, I won't say mastery, but sufficient expertise in the topic that you can go really deep. You're exploring it from different angles. You're sometimes actually letting your subconscious do some heavy lifting. So you start on the project, and then you would do some other things, and then your subconscious would make a connection, or would find a piece of the jigsaw. And I found that just intellectually very satisfying experience. And it kind of lent itself in that approach, and that fulfillment, I guess, definitely lends itself to writing books. I've always read a lot, from a wide array, like plenty of cricket, but the significant majority would not be in cricket. Some other sport, but lots of history and kind of general non-fiction, although now I'm reading much more fiction, some of which has actually informed this a little bit. And then the co-writing is, so with Cricket 2.0, which is sort of my first real book, that was with Freddie Wild, my co-author. So we were both kind of writing lots on T20 at the time, and we had a sense of, there was this really big thing that had come that was, the most popular format of cricket. And it was, I think, 15 years or so old, and no one had really, people liked to kind of complain about it, but no one really took it that seriously as a sort of serious sport. And so we thought to actually dive into that was really interesting, and kind of felt quite novel. It was an absolute nightmare to get published. I think it was 19 publishers before we actually got one. So it was a real stretch, and we obviously thought, is this just not going to happen? So I think it took about a year and a half to get a publisher. But because in a way publishing can be quite conservative, and people were saying, where's the evidence? Well, people will buy books on T20, and the whole point of the book was there weren't books on T20, so you're kind of stuck, right? But that was a really enjoyable process, because it felt like it was filling in a lot of blanks in terms of, there's just stuff wasn't really out there. So that was, and then I have found co-writing very, stimulating. It's not, it's like my, Freddie described, I think he said I was like the dad in our co-writing partnership, because I was kind of pretty on it in terms of, I'm used to kind of writing a lot, and from previously being a freelancer, you was used to pretty comfortable dealing with lots of deadlines and everything. But co-writing, I think what I draw to it is more the sense of tapping into someone else's brain has been really fun. And I've done a few bits with academics, and therefore they're seeing things in quite a different way. And so that's actually quite good. And you have some frank debates, which is all good fun. But you hopefully get somewhere at the end that's better than you would have. Either you would have got to individually. I think that, with with Stefan Szymański, Crickenomics, which was because he'd done a book, Soccernomics, which was looking at football, soccernomics through a kind of an economic, well, partly an economic lens, but more a sense of curiosity and trying to explain phenomena that were distinct to football and things. And it was taking a similar approach to cricket. So that was very stimulating. And what I think one of the big things in that, which actually informed the Test cricket book as well from an Indian perspective, which was actually looking at where does India get their players from over time. And that's been one of the big shifts for India, is that they've gone from relying overwhelmingly on 5 or 6 cities for the bulk of their talent to now, that's opened up massively. And so it's just such a simple, way of explaining why someone would improve, as well if they're picking from, if their talent pools increase, and of course they would improve. So that was interesting in lots of ways. So one of the things in that as well that was showing that in cricket, basically to be a batsman you need is much more labor intensive. So you need the facilities, the coaching, the infrastructure, the sheer number of balls you face is much more important for batsmen than bowlers, which is why again and again we get this habit where this trend, which we certainly see in England, we see elsewhere, where batsmen tend to be socially generally much more, on average, much more advantage. Of course, you get exceptions, but generally much more advantage than bowlers. So to go back, so England would have this traditional cliche, but it was kind of true that the bats would be from sort of public schools in the south, and then the bowlers would be from the coal mines, which was obviously a big cliche and massively exaggerated, but there was also a grain of truth in that as well.
How did writing in different forms affect the writing and affect you? Because the bulk of your writing you would have done before this would be short form journalism. So you're writing pieces which are a few hundred words, or once in a while, even if you do a slightly longer form deep dive, it'll just be a couple of thousand at max. I mean, I don't know how many words you get out there in the publications you wrote for, but most would be just a few hundred. So, and most are written to deadlines. So they are kind of quick. They can't afford to go too deep. You're getting it over by a deadline and it's done. And a book is a sort of a longer project. It's like not even a marathon. It's just a whole different ballgame where your state of mind has to be different, where you settle into a subject and you go deeper and deeper and deeper and etc. And often I guess the process can be more frustrating because there's no immediate gratification of actually getting a piece out and etc. etc. So what was that like for you as a writer and a thinker? The challenge of writing your books, and I guess each of your books would have had a different challenge. Like this is different from your test cricket book is different from all the previous ones because it's covering a much longer span of time. There's more sociology in this, in a sense, and there's more sense of the shifting sands of culture and society and how countries are changing, etc., etc. So how did your writing change through this period? How did you change as a person through this period, and was it a great challenge to move from one form to the other?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it was a huge challenge. I've worked with some great editors, so I've got, by the standards of a sort of day-to-day journalist, I've got more scope. I have had more scope than most to do these longer projects. So I've been very grateful in that sense. That so of course writing a book is a complete quantum leap from that, but maybe a little bit less of a leap than had I not had those pretty regular chances to do the more in-depth pieces in my day job. But yeah, clearly, I suppose a book like this was such a of course it's very, very daunting, and it's how do you I suppose I came to it really with the spirit of this is the book I want to read, and I don't think it currently exists, which was and I was talking to Simon Wilde, who wrote a very good biography of the England Test team, and I basically said, have you thought of doing this but globally? And he sort of said, oh, you need to be mad to do that. And I thought, okay, maybe I am mad. And then 5 years later, I think I was amazed by, I mean, I knew I'd have to do a lot of reading, but the sheer scale probably hadn't dawned on me. I think about 350 books I would have read. The bibliography is pretty chunky, and to go, and that was the real was a real joy actually of this book, which I haven't had on the previous ones, just because they've been more contemporary. So it was going back reading primary material from the 19th century actually. Yeah, sort of challenging those received wisdoms and making you think, this was not inevitable. This really could have gone differently. That's really, yeah. So you very much are trying to kind of think of the story through how it was played out at the time, rather than do everything through a lens of hindsight. And this is me in 2025, and so explaining how something developed and how this test cricket developed in such as ad hoc way through the prism of kind of how things were at the time, and not kind of retrospectively going well, and not almost not imposing what I would think, so just not looking at it through a contemporary lens, but kind of, so that was just kind of, I guess, rolling back and look at the decisions that people face to get from A to B, which was, and it's a quite an unusual book in that I think, normally you'd have either a current book which you'd rely a lot on, on interviews, or you'd have a history book where you're going through the archives. My approach really fuses both. So we went through, read over 300 books, spent absolute hours and hours and hours on YouTube trying to get a sense of actual how players were playing, and looking through some very grainy footage in a lot of cases, but still getting a sense, which was really important. And then I was able to do, which I really wasn't expecting when I started the book. I thought very much it would be books and old YouTube, and that would be that would be plenty. And then I kind of got to a point when I realized to do what I really wanted to do and fill in what actually were quite a lot of gaps, because this story had really been told through a prism of individual countries rather than piecing everything together as I wanted to do. So I realized I had to actually do a lot of interviews, and that I wasn't banking for that, but I'm so glad I did. So I did do probably 40 or 50 interviews, really with players, and I was kind of really blown away by the number of great players I got and how generous they were with their time, and actually their pride at being part of this story, which I think has helped to open doors. Obviously, I know some of these guys anyway, but to have got, I suppose from India, I talked to Rahul Dravid, Sachin Tendulkar, Ravichandran Ashwin, Jinkar Rahane, and then around the world, tons of Michael Holding, Ian Chappell, Kevin Peterson, Dale Steyn, tons of Murali, so many great interviews, and that was a real joy. And I think we talked about how strange Test cricket is, and one of the things that came a common theme among those was this sort of rapport they have with opponents, and it is like, of course they want to win and everything, but there is a sense of this kind of mutual respect and the sense of being part of a shared story, which I think the nature of Test cricket lends itself to that, in terms of you have this series, you're just the weirdest of, you play a 5-match series, you are potentially sharing over those 5 games 150 hours on the field with these guys. It is absolutely crazy. So of course you're going to socialize with them and stuff off the field and stuff, so you do have a sense of they have this kind of bond between them, which I think is is distinct to Test cricket because of just the time factor and the amount of time. And you think if you're playing a club IPL season or a Premier League football season, well, actually you're playing so many different opponents the whole time. So this guy is amazing. You play him once or twice a season. It's not the same for 90 minutes. It's not the same as being on the field with these guys for so long. And the other weird kind of thing is you do get quite a lot of secrets that are shared across country lines, because people, often with spin bowlers, they have a real sense of the loyalty to their art transcends national divide. So you have these great stories of secrets of the googly being shared. Originally it starts in England and it spreads to South Africa, and then South Africa end up beating England with their 4 googly bowlers in 1906. And then the story the Dusra develops when Saqlain Mushtaq on his debut plays with Murali. It plays against Murali. And Murali sees, after the game, he's like, he sees this, and they're talking to each other, and Sack Lane just gives him the state secrets there again. He just gives him the code, and then Murali becomes, obviously, Sack Lane's a great bowler, but Murali is one of the absolute best of all time. And I talked to Sack Lane, and I was like, why did you do that? And he said, well, I was given this gift. My job is to share this gift, not just to keep it for myself, which was a lovely story. And there's something very, I think people do have such a pride in their art. Spin bowling would be the most extreme example, but you have also with seamers. I talked with Alan Donald about, so he was having a chat with Courtney Walsh and Curtly Ambrose about how to bowl with Sachin, and they were, sharing secrets. Or we have the wobble seam, which is where where you bowl with your fingers are solid, kind of slightly loose either side of the seam, and it basically can veer in either direction. And anyway, so Donald learned that Ambrose and Walsh were doing this ball to Tendulkar. Then he starts to do it himself to Tendulkar. So you have this, you get a lot of butterfly effects in Test cricket, where a small thing happens here and then it gets taken to a different level somewhere else. And again, you get of the kind of big changes in the way the game is played. It's very rarely the inventor who is the perfecter of something. The inventor takes something and then others perfect it, which is a nice dynamic as well.
So in the course of writing this book, you would have gone in with a broad outline of what the territory you're going to cover, and then you dive in, and then you you read 350 books and you watch all these videos and so on and so forth. What did you learn about this territory at the end of the process that you didn't know at the start? Like, what surprised you, what delighted you, what disturbed you, what patterns did you find?
So the big the sort of central myth to Test cricket, which I think of as a complete myth, is that this is a very conservative sport that doesn't change. And I kind of all knew this was a myth, but I was surprised by the extent to which this is a myth, because this game has really changed. It's evolved constantly. That's been the only constant really in Test cricket's evolution. So you've had, Test matches have been scheduled over 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. They've been timeless over 6 days and timeless days. We have had rest days. We have had number of balls per over has gone. You've had 4, 5, 6, and 8. We had helmet, no helmets versus helmets was a massive change. You had the wickets being uncovered, which is when they were unbelievably difficult to bat on. And then from the sort of 70s, they're covered when it's raining, which makes a huge difference as well. The number of teams has gone from 2 to 12. We've had day-night matches. World Test Championship, we now have. People always complain about this one change too far, but actually, Test cricket, it has kept on evolving, and so when it gets called for being a conservative sport, it is pretty odd, because of course it's remained a multi-innings sport, but beyond that, it's almost everything else has been negotiable over time, which kind of gets, it certainly got me to think actually now that I think we are maybe better at having 4-day matches and more of them than necessarily having, because we have a situation now where apart from the big three, there's been no 3-match series since 2019. So when, South Africa play New Zealand, I think now it'd be better if that was 3 tests times 4 days than 2 times 5. And the economics means they can't really have 3 times 5. So the kind of, the conservatism of Test cricket, that was a big takeaway. A huge one, which did shock me, was with a veneration of what it is to have a Test match and stuff, was how rare it's been that a Test match has genuinely been the best 11 players on both sides. It is really crazy how rare this has been, and the reason it's been so rare is because Test cricket has been used for all these other purposes, and people have often got in the way of picking your best team. So West Indies, because of the way in which the selection process, giving a huge role to the individual host in the particular country, basically meant that historically there would be a lot of horse trading over, Barbados want to get their players in, Jamaica wants to get their player in, there might be a horse trading, whatever. And so, West Indies' first home series, 1930, they have 28 different players over the 4 matches. So they're literally changing 7-8 players a match. They have 4 different captains, so a captain in each different captain for each test. In each case, the home territory, because they want their guys as captain. So that's been to be quite constant. So West Indies, and then that manifests itself when it manifests itself in the white captain's policy, which remains till 1960. And I show in the book how much this actually hurts the team on the field. So so West Indies, generally the board tries to have sort of 4 or 5 white players in the side, and this significantly undermines the competitiveness of the team. So the average for players in the top 6, so who are picked as specialist batsmen effectively, for white players until 1960 is 28. For everybody else is 43. So you're losing 15 runs an innings to maintain your position of prejudice, basically. And we see that in England with amateurs and professionals. In India is not, as you said, is not immune to this at all, because you have the sort of social dynamics plays a big role in the captains. And you also, I think, have a situation where it's just so difficult to play for India if you're not from the sort of 5 or 6 big centres, and that really hurts the team as well. So one of my, and this actually leads me to another thing, which is that everyone knows Australia is strong. I was kind of shocked by how much better than the rest Australia has been over time. So Australia over time win 1.75 tests for every one that they lose. The next best is 1.25. So the Australian team on average is basically 50% better than the rest, which is astonishing. And from I think between my second point and my third, I think there's a very clear link actually, which is that Australia is not immune to the perennial thing of not picking your best team. We have the story of Eddie Gilbert, great Aboriginal fast bowler in the 1930s, who you should have played. Don Bram said he was fastest he ever faced. He's not picked. But in general, an Australian team over time, and pick any random match, is closer to being the best 11 players that country possesses than is true in other countries. And that is a big factor in why Australia are so good. And so until 1980s, you don't have pro cricketers in Australia in the sense that we do now, but everyone is a semi-professional, which means everyone is paid to play, but will do other work on the side, which might be a different job. It might be kind of working typically for a kit manufacturer, that kind of thing. So it's sort of, but the point is, you have a situation where everyone is through the same system, so everyone's a semi-pro, and therefore you have the classic Australian thing of we pick the team first and then we pick the captain. But because there's less of the social dynamics and the kind of the challenge of maintaining that is not an issue in Australia in the same way. It makes it easier for them to just pick their best players. And so actually, that's a simple kind of moral lesson to other countries. Be a bit more like Australia. Just pick your actual best players without all the horse trading, and maybe in some ways it has been a bit easier for Australia because clearly West Indies has different countries and so on. But yeah, that was a kind of astonishing to think, and also makes you think when people talked about the sanctity of statistics in test matches. Well, I mean, this is kind of ludicrous because England used to 1890s, they would send literally about a D or E team to South Africa because they would send a deliberately weak team to try and be competitive, to try and not win too easily, basically. So when people say, Ireland or Zimbabwe ruin the stats of Test cricket, it's like, well, you haven't looked at the history of this at all because there's so many matches we've had that shouldn't have been Test matches.
Yeah, and we, kind of take it for granted that cricket has always been a particular way, and this is the orthodoxy, and this is how it's always been. And one of the things of, going back into history makes you realize how rapidly things have changed and how much they have changed. Like when I started following cricket 40 years back, it would have seemed to me that 200 years is a long time. But when you follow a sport for 40 years, it doesn't seem like a long time. It's just, a couple of lifetimes before me. And in your book, there's a fascinating passage at the start where you describe the evolution of bowling from underarm to sidearm to overarm, and how eventually in 1864 they finally decided, okay, it's only going to be overarm. And then how does one even imagine cricket before before that. You've got in the middle of all the human stories and in the middle of the cultural drama, you also talk about the evolution of the craft of the game itself. And WG Grace being the first person who went on the front foot and the back foot. Nobody before him kind of did that. Everybody did one thing, and it's kind of mind-blowing to realize that. And then Ranjit Singhji, who was such a fan of WG Grace himself, becomes a pioneer because he starts playing on the onside. As you point out, before that, it was considered rude to play a ball on the onside. You would sometimes apologize to the bowler if it accidentally
ungentlemanly conduct.
Yeah, and he starts doing that, and he starts doing that for practical reasons. He's going on the back foot, he's playing the ball late, and etc. And that kind of plays itself out, and you see for such a long time pitches were uncovered, so the conditions were so different. You wonder about what it would be like to play a fast bowler at times where the no ball rule was different, and your front foot could be completely all the way forward on uncovered pitches without helmets. No fun at all. So this thing called cricket then feels so nebulous that if you write about the history of the game, on the one hand, it is a game and you're writing about the history of it. But on the other hand, you can't compare cricket today to 40 years ago, to 40 years before that, to 40 years before that. So what even are you doing, So like for you, when does modern cricket therefore really begin in a sense? And can you possibly compare across eras and kind of get a sense? I mean, apart from coming at absolute judgments, like you look at the stats of Bradman and Sobers and what their contemporaries said about them, obviously they are complete outliers and all-time greats. But otherwise, how does one think about this? Like, I was startled by the stat about Sydney Barnes, who was supposed to be such a great medium fast bowler, actually bowling at somewhere like 60 to 70 miles an hour, which is really not terribly fast, and bowling off breaks and all of that. So how does one imagine the cricket of those days, and how does one then build that continuous story from there to now?
No, it's a great question. So the different aspects. So in terms of what we conceive of as Test cricket, in terms of being this genuinely multi-nation game, for me, that begins in the 1950s. So until then, 3/4 of all Test matches had involved England. So Test cricket is almost a series of bilateral engagements with England at their call. But from the 1950s, you begin to get really good rivalries that don't involve England. And so, when people talk about the best Test teams of all time, I think it's very hard to think of as pre-1950 teams, because they are basically generally, great Australian teams who win the Ashes, rather than, being good around the world, because they're not going to win or whatever. So I think 1950s onwards is when we think of, when I think of as Test cricket really being a multi-nation sport, even though I would argue that we could have had more nations earlier and so on. But that 1950s on was when, you begin to get to be a great Test cricketer. You need to play well in across different countries and continents and stuff, rather than just John Bradman was great because he played in Australia, England, and South Africa, and that was it. So it's like, okay, well, that's that. We can't really, in a way, it's hard to compare that to a Test cricketer who has to play in eight, 9 countries or whatever. And then the game itself, well, talking to players who lived either side of this, helmets is such a big fundamental thing. And what happens is, bowling is getting faster and faster, and then World Series cricket is the catalyst for helmets to actually become, helmets to really be developed very rapidly, and then actually quite quickly, Viv Richards is an exception, but quite quickly become stand to wear against fast bowling. And the reason is basically self-interest of Kerry Packer. So I talked with Ian Chappell about a long a shouting match he has with Packer in World Series cricket, when Ian Chappell said, I played my whole career. I just don't. I've never worn a helmet. I don't want to wear a helmet. And and Packer says, I really could not care less if you get hit. Like, I just couldn't care less if you get hit. But what I will not have, and what I will not do, is pay for 3 months for you to be lying in a hospital bed on me because you were hit in one of my games. And out of this, Chappell, kind of kicking and screaming, is forced to wear a helmet. So I think helmets is, we said 1970s, you get the start of helmets and the end of uncovered wickets. So those things together are pretty fundamental in terms of Test cricket looking what it looks like today. I think from the 50s onwards, you can. It is a more recognizable game, but yeah, I think from 70s, 80s, you're then looking at a game that does feel pretty, the fundamentals are still pretty similar to what we have today. But of course, you can absolutely approve, the so-called golden age in 1900s. There is a lot of cricket that would be great in any era. But I think, I think the fast bowling is such a big factor. Would never be able to answer this question, but my sense before 1950, you don't really have anyone who's bowling more than 85 miles an hour or so, which is still, so. I mean, 85 miles an hour without wearing a helmet, that is bloody quick. I'm not taking anything away, but it is slightly. But you've had evolutions in that, and you've had evolutions in just the relentlessness of it. So before, you might get a guy who could bowl really quick for 3 or 4 overs, and his pace is falling, and he's a one-off in his team. Now, I think what you get is not so much the top speed being more, but it's more that you get guys who can bowl 140 kilometers again and again and again, and that relentlessness and that physical threat is there. But you have this weird thing where mid-70s is where you get both fast bowling that's very quick and helmets that are not yet being worn, which is why actually the physical threat is probably, as a batter, is in those sort of 5-10 years is actually kind of bigger than it had ever been, I think, before or since.
And also, I guess what would have changed in the 70s and 80s is that, to go back to your earlier point, the national teams would have been far likelier to actually select their best 11, or actually at least make a good faith effort in trying to select their best 11. Fans will, of course, never agree that any 11 is the best 11 at a moment. Let's sort of talk.
If I could just. One of the great stories that is England tour India 1951 too. And their captain is a guy called Nigel Howard, who had never played for England before. He doesn't bowl. He's just a batsman. His average is 24 in first-class cricket, and he's selected to be the captain. And he goes to India, has an average of 17 in those Test matches, which is probably about as well as we could have expected. And it's kind of absolutely insane. And England do this very classic thing. So England don't win that 1-1, that series. England have a classic thing, where they, unless it's for the Ashes, they send a kind of purposefully weaker team abroad, and then if they lose to India or West Indies, they have a kind of thing, it didn't really count. So for England, actually, the point when Test cricket becomes this genuinely multi-nation game, actually, that's actually kind of 1950 when they lose at home to West Indies in England. They've lost West Indies before away, but again, we've had half hasn't counted. But when England are beaten at home, for them, that's a big moment. So that's. Yeah, and in terms of that happens again and again, where you get, especially touring teams, because players don't want to travel and things or whatever, so you don't send the strongest sides. And again, that does, sort of 60s, 70s, that's properly changing, where you actually do get your strongest side, and it is what we think of as an actual Test match.
The economist Joan Robinson once said of India that whatever you say of India, the opposite is also true. And it seems to me that cricket can also contain the same kind of multitudes, especially in the role that it plays in society. Like, on the one hand, through your book, we find all these different strands about how race and class and other prejudices kind of get in the way. You speak early on of how William Crom Hendricks of South Africa is not selected for the first tour to England. Tommy Barton of West Indies is castigated for not carrying the bags of his superiors, as it were, and so on and so forth. And you see this just happening down the decades, where West Indies is constantly captained by white people, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, you also quote a beautiful couple of passages from C.L.R. James, where he speaks about how on a cricket field everyone's equal, where he talks about the social divisions in the West Indies, but speaks of cricket almost as a great leveler, that hey, we are all equal here. You mentioned mentioned the Pentangular, which was, of course, the Indian domestic tournament where you had Parsis versus Hindus versus Mohammedans versus Europeans and the rest. And Mahatma Gandhi correctly criticized it, saying that, hey, you are, tying down people to their identity and you're solidifying these divisions. And at first sight, that seems completely correct. But then, as you also point out in your book, actually, the tournament was always played in very good graces, and you could equally look at it as an example of how different people, while not giving up their core cultural identity, could coexist together, play the beautiful game as it were. So, how does one think of this? That at one level, sport can reflect the worst things within society and can bring out our worst impulses, war minus a shooting, as it were. And at the same time, it can also mitigate these impulses by putting everyone on a common field of play where there is no place to hide and where your class or your race won't save you once the ball is coming at you at 80 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour or whatever.
Yeah, it's never simple, right? I think that your kind of lovely use of those examples from the history does show that Test cricket has brought out some of the best of humanity, really, in terms of it's shown but it's also exposed these contradictions, and one of the so Frank Worrell's first series as captain becomes the first permanent black captain of West Indies, 1960 in Australia. Well, that's an all-time great series. You have the tie test first. You then have Australia win 2-1, potentially only because of the lack of neutral umpires. Just putting that out there, and then at the end, you have hundreds of thousands of people in Melbourne. They are applauding Worrell and his team on the way home. So it's an amazing moment. But that is happening at a time in a country which still has the white Australia policy, immigration and stuff. Yeah, bizarre contradiction, just kind of this bit built in. Things are hard to reconcile sometimes. Yeah, I'm not sure there's always easy answers. I think there has been a capacity of Test cricket to bring out the best, but there's also, of course, there's been, it can be a catalyst for tension and things. Well, now I think I would say Test cricket on balance has been a force for good on the kind of wider stuff, but I would say, like, on balance is doing a lot of work there. That is, it can be either thing, right? And certainly you saw for example, with West Indies and their great fastball in 1980s, I think there was a racial dimension to how that was attacked and criticised in many cases. And there's a sense also that the laws of the game, right? They exist they are used by the establishment when they're in the establishment's interest. They're also ignored by the establishment when they're not in the establishment's interest. And the classic example of this, so we talked about the Commonwealth aspect of it. You have to be part of the Commonwealth to play Test cricket. That's literally part of the rules, the early rules of the sport as established and set up by South Africa in 1909. They are the instigators of this. And then in 1960, South Africa are kicked out of the Commonwealth because of apartheid policies, which means by the laws that they have helped to establish, they are not eligible to play Test cricket. But what happens is Australia, England, and New Zealand, they just ignore their own laws, which they've helped to create, and just carry on playing Test matches against South Africa for another 10 years throughout the 60s. And so, they've just ignored laws when they don't tell them what's in their interests. And so that contradiction is quite prevalent throughout the history of Test cricket, that these laws that we think are kind of these immutable laws, it turns out they're very malleable when certain people want them to be malleable. Otherwise, they can't be changed for anything. Which is, that's quite a persistent. There's this hypocrisy is often there.
No, and actually, South Africa is a great example for exactly this, because on the one hand, you have, the sporting boycott of South Africa becoming a way in which sport is used as a tool to handle this issue. But at the same time, it almost didn't happen. As you point out in your chapter on that, there were efforts to, pay off Basil D'Oliveira so that he wouldn't go for the trip, to give him another lucrative job coaching colored cricketers elsewhere, and so on and so forth. So it almost went the other way, and it just so happens that it went this way. Some of these divisions are alive and issues to the current day, like issues of race and class, and I don't know if they'll ever leave us. But some of them are not. Like this professionals versus amateurs thing is something that I think confounds everyone who is not British, because it doesn't really seem to exist anywhere outside of the empire to this extent. New Zealand barred professionals for decades. In fact, you talk of Stewie Dempster, who averaged 65 in the 10 test matches he played, or much later Martin Donnelly, who averaged 52.9 in the 7 tests he played. And you speak about how the discrimination in England remained to the point that all their captains were amateurs, and average what you said, they averaged really low averages. And even the way the names were written, like if you were professional, you'd be Fred Truman. If you were amateur, you'd be PBH May. And it's interesting how the word changes, because today amateur is almost a cuss word. Like if somebody plays badly, you'll tell them, hey, you're just an amateur. Give me a sense of this. And I'm guessing class is like completely embedded in this, because anyone who's a professional is almost like a working man who's playing for money. But all the great English icons, from Hobbes and Sutcliffe to Hammond to Hutton, they were all professionals, as it were. But until perhaps Hutton becomes the captain, the discrimination remains.
Well, of course, with Hammond, so he's a professional, but he then becomes an amateur, and he's one who says, actually, he doesn't kind of get it. He's like, nothing has changed, and I'm suddenly, he says, this is completely illogical what's happened. I was the same person as before. So what happens is he joins the board of directors of a tire company, who allow him to play as much cricket as he wants. So he's almost a de facto professional, but they use him for PR purposes, and then he's allowed to then be a amateur, which means he can captain and stuff. But the hypocrisy is hard to overstate. So the amateurs would earn expenses in inverted commas, but these would often be worth more than the salaries of the professionals. So Jim Laker, 1958-9, he's like, he requests to the MCC to switch from professional to amateur for the tour because he wants to earn more money from the tour. So this is just, the hypocrisy is absolutely ludicrous. But he's not allowed to, because he is the wrong sort of person to be an amateur. So this is embedded in England's conception of how to build a team, really. And so it's actually until 1962 you have the division in county cricket, and there's a real sense of people really mourn this. And there's a great quote from Lord Hawke, 1925, so 100 years ago, who says, I love and admire them more, but pray God that no professional should ever captain England. It would be a thousand pities. So this is a bastion which exists to be protected. And I kind of goes back to, you always say the officer class thing, where you have a certain type of person that the MCC want to be the leaders, the captains. And there's another dimension too, which is that a cricket tour is not just a cricket tour, it is a lot of what goes into being a captain, and what people want from a captain is actually to have a good person to talk to the ambassador at cocktail parties and stuff like that. And so this is why there's such this social standing. It's not just, England have this most extreme example, but you do get other countries where you get, I think, it's pretty clear that preferential treatment is given to people from, higher social standing, often who can speak English or who went to Oxbridge or whatever. So with Javed Miandad, he rails against what he calls the Oxbridge complex, and says, in Pakistan, he says, why should it matter, where someone went to school, if how they can speak English, how does that qualify them to be captain of the team? And that's a persistent thing as well. So you do get in, to be honest, pretty much every country apart from, with Australia being at the bottom of that scale, there is a big element of social standing informing who is captain, which is just from the outside, it's just preposterous. But then Test cricket did serve this broader function, and hence the establishment was so keen to protect this. And of course, this is much more. In the case of West Indies, what was this about? Well, actually, if you kind of really take a step back, so we're seeing to have these great teams who win in England, with black players, largely, doing, the bulk of the work, and actually the leading players. But there's Louis Constantine says, why is there this strand that the establishment said, well, of course, but there's a white captain, so that is maintaining something that resonates far more than cricket, and I think the establishment have always been. Administrators have always really been keenly aware of the resonance that this game has, and hence are so keen to protect their own interests through the game. And then the Dollavera affair in South Africa, well, actually, a lot of MCC figures who were anti the apartheid ban, well, they often had business interests, financial interests in South Africa, as well as close friendships and stuff. So it was not so actually by opposing a ban, they were actually benefiting their own business interests and their ability to make money from Anglo-South African trade and everything. So yeah, it's not just about cricket for them. They probably don't really care who England pick, but they do care about whether their business interests in South Africa could be damaged, and they want things to be as normal as possible. And that's the thing for the South African government. They basically say, well, we can play Test cricket. That tells a bulk of our population that stuff is really not. It's pretty normal here. It's not as strange as some people say, because we can still, but we're still playing Australia and England, and everything is all roses, right?
And there are elements of hypocrisy even here throughout this issue of playing South Africa. Like you point out, these different rebel tours go. And at one point, Collis King, when he's castigated for going, actually asks a question that, hey, all of you are trading with South Africa. If I trade my services with South Africa, what the fuck is the problem? Why is it, something different? And you also point out the startling way in which, when you look at what happens in the 90s, everyone who went on the rebel tours for the West Indies is pretty much destitute and destroyed by circumstances, Richard Austin and so on, whereas everyone who went from England is actually rehabilitated. They are again part of the elites. Gooch goes on to captain England successfully. At one point you point out how all the selectors are people who once been on a rebel tour to South Africa. So I'm like, what happened here? How did it change so fast that, South Africa is back, but why was that wrong then and not wrong now? And that's also kind of baffling to me.
Yeah, no, that is astonishing, the difference as well. I think to explain those, and I think anyone who wants to go even deeper on this particular topic, Ashley Gray's book The Unforgiven is very good, which is looking at all the West Indies players who went on those tours and what happens to them. But essentially, I think that the racial context is so much more. It just resonates so much more in West Indies because there is a sense of people feel a sense of betrayal with West Indies players who go, and they're obviously Caribbean people are so aware of racial injustice, whereas the English establishment, they, who, as I said, often have trading links themselves and South Africa, and they kind of feel they don't. I mean, the issue doesn't exercise them in the same way, to be honest. So the rebels, where they get a life ban in some other country, Caribbean, although Ezra Moji does play for West Indies after, but in the bulk they're actually banned from kind of all cricket. In England it's they get these 3-year bans from Test cricket, but they're allowed to play county cricket in the meantime. Australia has a similarly gentle approach, and I think the establishment aren't particularly. They want to be seen to be doing something, but they just don't. To be honest, I don't think they just don't think they care all that much. And so once they've done once they've done some performative. A bit of performative ban, that they're not going to let this stop them picking the players that they want for the England team. And then, you have this incredible situation where, so of the 30 England rebel tours across the 2 tours, 12 play Test cricket again. John Embury, who goes on, he's the only player who goes on both rebel tours, so does it twice. He's then records international cricket on both occasions and becomes assistant coach for England. And then you have a situation where you said the whole selection panel, but also that you have a selection panel comprising exclusively rebels who are then lecturing future players on loyalty, on not on playing for money, criticize them for playing for money and not for the badge and stuff, in the context of the rise of T20 leagues and stuff. So it is incredible, actually. Yeah, how tolerant England are, and Australia as well. This your chairman of selectors, Trevor Hons, he won the rebel tours as well, and players all really return, and everything is kind of is fine for them. Whereas, there's huge differences. Whereas for guys in Western Caribbean, it is life ruining for a lot of them because they're completely ostracized. This is pretty bleak stuff in terms of it's very much a different rule for different people, frankly.
It's also sad how all of like geopolitics takes so many prisoners here. Like, I imagine if Barry Richards was a musician or a guitarist, or Graham Pollock was an author, they would still be flourishing and doing their thing. But these guys, because they're playing a team sport, and because that sport is under a board that has a monopsony on the sport, they have no options. They're kind of screwed forever. They're victimized by that forever. Of course, they make a fair bit of money playing county cricket and all of that, but they don't have the careers they would. And as you point out in your book, these are not even the primary victims. The primary victims are all those black and colored cricketers who never got a chance in the first place. And I mean, they are the real unseen. They are the ones whose names we do not know. When I look at cricket, that quip that you made about the golden age, where you speak about the 1910s, 1920s, and you say the Imperial Cricket Conference was more imperial than cricket, it would seem that in certain ways that carries through to the day, in the sense that the countries that play cricket today are pretty much countries that were once part of the British Empire. We got the game from them. We inherited that sense of values right down to the point of, your batsmen tend to be more upper class and your bowlers tend to be more working man, the classic Gavaskar versus Kapil Dev kind of dichotomy. And only recently, perhaps in the last 20-25 years, that's kind of begun to change. But cricket still is an imperial sport and not a global sport, because it is only played in these handful of countries, and it wasn't always thus. The USA played Canada once, Argentina had a flourishing cricketing culture, as you pointed out. So, what could the counterfactual have been? Because with the benefit of hindsight, everything that happened in history seems inevitable. But what could the counterfactual have been? Could it have been a global sport? Can it be a global sport today? Or, is it just the few of us tragic fans in this handful of countries who think of it as a global sport, but it's not really?
So the footprint of cricket was not inevitable. I completely agree. Like, there are moments that things could have been a more global game. Remember, cricket in America before the Civil War is the most popular game in America. Abraham Lincoln goes to a game and everything. And then it retreats after the Civil War, but in Philadelphia, it's still really, really vibrant. They have Barty King, who's a sort of Sydney Barnes type of bowler, and he's seen as, about 1900s, many people think he's the best bowler in the whole world. And they go on a number of tours in England and are very, very competitive. And so 1909 for me is a big sliding doors moment. So what happens? Well, if you get US and Argentina, I'm pretty sure you're going to get Canada fairly soon afterwards, because cricket is pretty strong in Canada as well, and clearly if America are in it, that would make things so much easier in Canada. You then potentially actually, because you have more countries, so you're not like you need to play test cricket. Because you have more countries, you then make it easier to have other countries, because there wouldn't be like you play test cricket, you then play Australia and England straight away. So then might mean that, who knows, West Indies, India, New Zealand, who all get test status in the mid 20s, they could get to status. They could have got to status earlier, or even if they get it at the same time, then you have a more. Suddenly, you get those three as well, and then suddenly you have Canada, US, Argentina. You have nine. You have nine by the 1930s. You could have 9 countries, 9 test play countries already, and then you acquire at least the ones you acquire already that cricket did in fact acquire. But you suspect if a game is, I don't think the counterfactual is that cricket is like the number 1 game in America, but if cricket is like a well-established number 6, 7 sport in America, which I think is a plausible counterfactual, that's still very, that is still a very serious sport in America. That's America producing a very solid and frankly, America is so big that even if Philadelphia remains the cradle of cricket, and this, that in itself is, Philadelphia, compared to New Zealand or whatever, you could easily produce a pretty good cricket team from Philadelphia alone, and it would have, I'm sure, with a national team have sort of spread out there, and I think just the kind of cultural cachet you get by virtue of it being pretty big in America brings more as well. But you also, if you'd had this sliding doors, I think you also get a normalization of the laws of the game, because remember how we have all these anomalies where you have different overs in different countries and things like that. I suspect with America, there might have been more of an attempt to properly kind of codify this thing earlier, and so make a test match. Not have 3-day test matches and then timeless tests the following test. So maybe you get a slightly more coherently run game. And in terms of where we are now, well, I think T20 still happens and stuff. So I'm not, but you have more countries playing it. You have more tours. I think also, you look at actually the big thing is you look at American sports. They all have such a structure, and you look at the history of Test cricket, the series of bilateral games. Again, we talked a lot earlier about trying to take a step back suddenly, and like, how's this thing look in comparison? When you talk to American, they just the conception of playing a bilateral series without a reward other than winning or losing for what happens just makes no sense. The notion of playing, you're 3-0 down, why do you play 2 more test matches and stuff? Is a perennial crash for England when they go on these Ashes tours, of course. So I suspect you probably get a sort of test championship or even a divisional structure a lot earlier. Remember, I think Pakistan in the 60s was first, mooting a divisional structure and stuff. You might essentially get the Netherlands, where there's you could have got them potentially 50s, 60s. In Denmark, you could have had divisions and stuff, more structure. So you could have had quite a different sport. Obviously, for me as a cricket journalist, some great away trips, most importantly of all, as well.
Yeah, and also if there were more countries, there'd be more competition, there'd be more pressure to perform, and there would be more reform. There's something like the professionals versus amateurs thing, or West Indies not having a black captain sooner would just get sorted out sooner because, hey, you want to compete at the end of the day, and it's not just 2 or 3 other sort of countries playing the game. Let's take a quick break and let's continue this conversation on the other side. Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've enjoyed teaching 27 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing, and an online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, and a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs rupees 10,000 plus GST, or about $150. If you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just a willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you. Welcome back to The Seen and the Unseen. I'm still chatting with Tim Wigmore about his magnificent writing on cricket, particularly his latest book on the history of Test cricket. One of the sort of the things I liked about this book is all the sort of human stories that are in it, which also give us a sense of individual idiosyncrasies and why people play the way they are or do the things they do. And I was, in fact, struck there by, all your detailed sort of descriptions of how, different players, their styles were shaped by circumstances. You talk of how Everton Weeks, you would play with a tape ball, so he'd learn to keep the ball down and play along the ground. I don't remember if your book mentions it, but Sunil Gavaskar has a similar story where he would play in the gullies outside his house and the aunties would get mad if he broke the windows, so he'd be along the ground as well. Gary Sobers had his high back lift and played so much in the back foot because he played beach cricket with a tennis ball. Similarly, Brian Lara played softball cricket with a tennis ball, so that helped him play spin really well as he did. You speak about how both Hobbs and Hutton could actually split their careers into 2 parts, on either side of World War I in Hobbs' case and World War II in Hutton's case, because they played differently depending on the circumstances. And you have all of these different individual kinds of techniques coming up because of circumstances. And I was sort of struck by how little we know even today about what is optimal and what really works. Like you mentioned Bradman's rotary method, where his bat doesn't come down in a straight line, but it's almost, at that unusual angle towards gully. And he was in fact told once that when you come to England, you'll have to learn to play with a straight bat, and of course, he had to do no such thing. And as you point out, that did not lead to his success, did not lead to a re-evaluation of technique, because decades later, when Steve Smith comes along and starts doing crazy things or starts doing unusual things, people say the exact same things about him. I think you've quoted, Justin Langer telling the then captain Ponting that, hey, this kid is never going to play Test cricket, and look what kind of happens. So, and given that your other books also are about, cricket's embrace of modern ways of thinking in terms of technology and data and all of that, give me a sense of the evolution of understanding of how people do the things that they do. Like, one of the things that, for example, strikes me about another sport I love and follow deeply, which is chess, is that there is an orthodox way of thinking about the game, and that way is broadly correct in terms of giving initiative and space the value that they deserve, but it actually gets a balance between them slightly wrong, as we discovered when Alpha Zero came and pretty much knocked the pants of the existing best engines in the world at that time, which were already way better than the best human players. And then you could get into that and realize that, okay, this is in terms of knowledge, it came as far as we know, but then it went further, so now we have to re-evaluate what we know about the game. So has there been a similar evolution in terms of thinking about cricket technique and the way we play? Like, earlier, of course, we spoke about, Grace being the first person to go on the back foot and the front foot at the same time, Ranji playing on the onside. Give me a sense of the evolutions of technique, as it were. And I just mentioned batting technique here, but feel free to bring bowling into it as well. You have a couple of great chapters on reverse swing and so on. So give me a sense of how an understanding of technique has evolved through the years, because it seems to me that while there is an evolution, it can happen at a glacial pace, which is why the way Bradman played would not be considered orthodox or even acceptable even today.
No, I think it gets to a few different strands. I think one of which is how England, there's a kind of fetishization of the orthodox and, being correct in inverted commas more so than in other countries, which is why the English cricket culture traditionally has not lent itself to difference. Look at if Lasith Malinga or Jasprit Bumrah, had come through the English system, people, all the coaches I talked to say under 13, someone has said, you cannot bowl like that. What are you doing? Your balance is all wrong. Why is your arm so low when you bowl and everything? So there's a real, there is a bit of a sense, I think, historically, most innovations have come from outside England for whatever. I think this sort of conservatism, this reverence of, what people say, the MCC, the coaching manual, MCC coaching manual, is a strand of that. And yeah, so you need, Ranji was one of the who challenges this, the kind of the correct way of playing it, if you like. And you do, so in terms of batting, so let's go back. So you talk with W.G. Grace. W.G. Grace is a pioneer in terms of being an all-round, front and back foot player, and actually just reacting. What he does, I think, he reacts to the length of the ball and uses the length of the ball to work out where is the best place for him to hit the ball. In terms of, if it's a fuller ball, he bowls. He will be more on the front foot. If it's shorter ball, on the back foot, as opposed to just being like, I'm a front foot player and then not really adjusting to where it is. So that's a kind of revolutionary step. What Ranji does is the leg side, but it's also some people hit on the leg side, but it's basically if the taboo is really hitting a ball from the offside to the leg side, and this is the genius of the leg glance, is he will be flicking balls from off stump or even just outside off stump to the onside to find leg, and suddenly he's kind of reimagined the geography of the cricket field there. And obviously that means, people are going to complain, it's not fair, blah blah, but you need to spread your field around a lot more, which then means it's hard to get him out, because if he hits a ball in the air on the offside, you're going to have fewer fielders there because you need to cover the leg side as well. So of course, with a great batting like that, one of the interesting things is the more places you can hit the ball as a batsman, you are also reducing the penalty you have to pay for when you make a mistake, because they have to set the field accordingly. Whereas if you're more limited as a batsman, it actually means they're going to have more slips. So when you make an edge, there's more chance of that being fatal for you. So Ranji is a pioneer there. Bradman is historically a very hard batsman to place, I think, because he has this method that is unbelievably successful, and yet it's not really copied, which is kind of perplexing. So I remember I was asked to pick a most significant test team of all time, obviously, which is not the same as best, but I didn't have Bradman in it. I had Ranji at number 3 instead, and people are attacking me. But I would say actually Ranji changes the game. Like, when you watch a cricket game today, you feel Ranji's impact. When you watch a test cricket game, I'm not sure you feel Bradman's impact, which is crazy to say about someone who statistically is, maybe one of the biggest outliers in any sport. Not just, he's obviously the biggest outlier in cricket, but maybe the biggest outlier in any sport, full stop. But there's this weird sense of how much does he actually change the game. And there's a history, and then historically there is a trend. I think the very best, two interesting other aspects where the very best batters tend to be more back foot players than front foot. So with Garfield Sobers, he did say that the back was his default. Obviously, he could play on the front, and he did play on the front, but I think because of playing the ball late, the back is slightly. And you also have a trend where most great batters historically have been average height or slightly shorter than average. So I think of what I use as a kind of catch-all for great as a test batsman is 5,000 runs, an average above 50. And I think only 4 of the 28 members of that club are 6 foot or more. So that is an interesting trend historically. And I think part of that is in terms of the lengths you bowl. I think as a sort of to shorter players, actually, there can be more margin for error in their lengths because they can, if you're slightly short, that's easier for them to actually to hook or pull potentially. I think that there's something there, and potentially a balance thing, and also actually just a kind of a function of practice as well, is that if you're shorter, you're going to have much more practice over your lifetime of facing short balls and bouncers, because it means, if you're 5'5", actually, when you're a kid, people can still bowl short to you. Whereas if you're 6 foot plus, you won't face any short bowling until you get into adults cricket. But I think that's a big function as well, actually, where, think of Sachin Tendulkar, whoever, some of the shorter batsmen are very good against fast bowling and short bowling. I think the practice element is important there. So there's a few, and maybe a balance sense as well. And then I suppose you have impacts of one-day cricket. And I think one-day cricket really, from probably India winning the World Cup in 1983, it begins to be a kind of a proper, which is the third World Cup. But I think only after that does it become a really proper game in terms of the way it's analysed and how seriously people are taking it. And really, probably only in the early 90s do you begin, more specialization in terms of more one-day specialists, which is often used as a kind of a negative term, actually. Someone that it's sort of implied they're not good enough for test cricket, rather than being, oh wow, they're really good at one-day cricket. But that, I think, so the Australian, so as you see an interesting trend where you see Sri Lanka win the World Cup in 1986, and then they bring in that kind of tactic, the kind of more aggressive, expansive batsmanship. They then bring that into Test cricket. And then the Oval in 1988, there's a real seminal test when they beat England by 10 wickets. And this is Murali's test. He gets 16 wickets. It's an unbelievable feat. But from a batting point of view, this is actually a fascinating test as well, which is basically in their first innings, England get 4-4-5, and everyone thinks that this game is safe. Sri Lanka bat for the same amount of time, but get a lead of 146 because they're scoring so much quicker. And they're buying themselves time in the game. So in the 90s, you begin to get one-day tactics imported into Test cricket. One of which actually is, I think about boundaries, but I think a very significant one is what happens on non-boundary balls. So you actually get more intense running between the wickets, which Australia are very good at. And Australia, under the sort of Steve Waugh team from '99, they do instigate a leap forward in run rates, not just for them, but it's actually mimicked around the world. And the kind of intensity with which they run between the wickets is part of that. You also then subsequently begin to get more scoops and so on used in test matches more, and you get this trade-off where the taboo of getting out to this shot is less, and something like, well, you can get out if you play a cover drive or whatever, and just as you can get out reverse sweeping or whatever. But actually, when you look at these things, we always like to say T20 or whatever has caused these new shots. It's clearly caused them it's popularized them and stuff, but when it's invented them, I'm often not so sure. So, I, in my research, found with the Larry Constantine, the great was in his around 1930s, he was playing, basically what we now call a ramp at Lords in 1939. Reverse sweep. The Mohammed brothers were playing at 1950s, 1960s. So you do, these shots that are thought of as very modern actually often have much longer histories than we realise, but the difference is how common they are now. So in terms of batting, that would be, and I suppose helmets is the big other factor, right? Because that also makes it easy to play on the front foot. So we talked about historically most players have most great players have been more back foot. I think playing on the front foot, there's just the physical threat of being on the front foot with helmets is a little bit less than without. So that has been a factor as well, and maybe in terms of probably encouraging players to take on the short ball a little bit more as well, and obviously without uncovered wickets as well, there's a bit more sort of trust that people can have in the bounce in general and so on. Don Bradman famously, people pulled through his records, on uncovered wickets, his record was pretty average, so there was a sense of it's a completely different game. Well, that's become less so, but clearly you've had the rise of Asia in Test cricket. You've just had the amount of spin that's bowled has gone up a lot historically. So playing, how well you play spin has become much more essential to determining who is great as a batsman. Does that work as a bit of an overview of batting?
That's a great overview, a sort of follow-up. In your book, you also document how scoring rates have changed through the decades and for different reasons. And how much of it is really shaped by circumstance? For example, as you point out in the 1910s, before when pitches are still uncovered, it makes sense to bat aggressively because you're going to get out sooner or later to a ball that misbehaves, so make as many runs as you can. So you increase the variance there because that makes sense in that situation. Similarly, in you've documented how Pakistan and India, when they play each other especially, are incredibly dour. The run rates are really slow. You have many more draws than you would expect, and both teams are pretty weak early on. In India, certainly it is a case that so many of our batsmen all the way up to the 90s would have this mindset of going for individual glory and individual landmarks because they assume that the team is going to lose anyway, and that shapes the way that you play. And you also pointed out that, hey, Sri Lanka, when they came into Test cricket, were actually pretty damn aggressive, and the reason for that is that they played one-day cricket first, so they were used to those sort of rhythms of one-day cricket, and aggression came more naturally to them. And you have circumstances changing all of this, and then you have that deliberate attempt which comes in, say, at the end of the 1990s. Of course, Sri Lanka, used that tactic of Kalu Witharne and Jayasuriya at the top to win the 96 World Cup. But then you have John Buchanan and Steve Waugh, deciding that, hey, let's bat faster and lift run rates because that'll give our bowlers more time to take 20 wickets, and you have, run rates going up from 3 and over to 4 and over practically in that era of the early 2000s. So give me a sense of how the thinking about this has evolved, because I remember when T20 came about, I wrote a piece for Cricinfo circa 2008 before it began, talking about many of the things that it would do, and I'm kind of proud that I got some of them right. And one of them certainly was that the way people look at the value of aggression would change. Like when people first began playing one-day cricket in the 1970s, they adopted almost a test match template to it, which is how India makes 136 with Gavaskar making 36 not out, because they haven't figured out that you have to play differently. And that takes a long time to change. And my criticism of early T20 cricket, which persists with many teams to this day, is that you've taken the ODI template to it, where you slog early, you consolidate, you slog at the end. And the case that I made was that, look, in one-day cricket you have 50 overs and 11 batsmen, and here you have the same number of resources in terms of 11 batsmen, but you have 20 overs. So the cost of a dot ball goes up, the cost of a wicket comes down, etc., etc., and therefore the expected value. I was a professional poker player for a while, so I use these terms. The expected value of aggression is higher. Now, what I did not expect is that, one, of course, I expected that teams will adapt to the expected value of aggression being higher in T20 cricket and play it more aggressively, as indeed West Indies did while winning the T20 World Cup, where they did what I call front loading from the very start, attacked all the way through. But that other teams, particularly England, figured out that they had been underestimating the expected value of aggression in one-day cricket all along. And I think that a remarkable period of 5 years where England would regularly score 300 in ODI games by playing much more aggressively, which was something earlier that happened only on the batting pitches of the subcontinent, that shift kind of took place. And now recently I see another shift where people are figuring out, much as you could say Buchanan did in 2000, and Andy Flower after that, and etc., that even the expected value of aggression in test matches has been vastly underestimated. And when I look at what game theory tells us about different sports, in pretty much every sport, the finding that you get is that conventional thinking underestimates the value of aggression. Whether it is in poker where people fold too much and don't raise enough, or whether it is in cricket. So you've actually written multiple books on exactly this, including Cricket 2.0 and your book on how England won the World Cup and so on and so forth. So give me a sense of how thinking on this strategic and tactical thinking has evolved.
So, I mean, to take a step back, I think what explains this phenomenon is almost the availability bias, which is that if you do something unusual and lose, it's like, what the hell are you doing? And you're criticised more for that. So in cricket, I mean, Mike Gatting, 1987 World Cup final, classic example. He plays a reverse sweep to Alan Border, misses it, gets out LBW, and that is still like, even now, almost 40 years later, that's still brought up again and again as like, what the hell are you doing? And if he's caught playing a forward defensive, which has no actually expected return, is if he's trying to block the ball and he misses it, so not even trying to score a run and he's out, no one's actually remembering that shot. And I think that's a good example that just shows there is such a tendency towards protecting yourself. And I think there's also true that, I think as John Maynard Keynes said, failing convention, as John Maynard Keynes says, taking risks and then failing is what gets you fired, basically. So actually, if you're under pressure from the point of view of like preserving your place in the team, it can sometimes be rational to play more conservatively and do the kind of the done thing in inverted commas, because if you're as a batsman you're struggling and you get out playing a full defensive, you're going to be criticised less than if you're caught going for a six, caught on the boundary or whatever in a test match. And I think there's also in tennis in sport a real, if you're seen to be sort of taking the piss, that's really, really hated. And playing an unconventional shot is seen as a way of taking the piss, even though you're just seeing as a utilitarian way to get from A to B to score some runs, right? So I think these forces all combine together, and there's lots of examples. Actually, in football, it shows it really well. If you're behind in a match, so you're 1-0 down after 50 minutes. So the rational thing from the point of view of drawing or winning that match, the rational point of view is to make your substitutions very decisively, very early. So make attacking substitutions. That's a rational thing for a manager to do. But why don't they do it? Well, I think the reason in this case is because by playing that hand early, you actually increase the variance at both the positive and the negative side. So by making you're 1-0 down, so you make these series of substitutions, you've now got more chance of winning the game. Positive. You've also got more chance of losing 3 or 4-0. Obviously, big negative. So again, a manager under pressure, you're playing against a side who's better than you. Well, you might think, if we just hold out, we obviously want to get back into it, but we lose 1-0, maybe I'll keep my job. Whereas if we go all out, we lose 3 or 4-0, then the whole crowd saying you're getting sacked in the morning, and then you probably are getting sacked, right? So these forces all play out in a way that encourages a kind of regression, a kind of more conservatism. And so cricket, the ways of the ways that have been shown to counter this, T20 basically is like, if you lose wickets early in what is, as you said, a very, very short game, previously if you lose 3 wickets early, the tendency would be to consolidate, to take your time. But actually, by doing that, you're putting you're lowering the ceiling that you can reach, the number of runs you can get, which is, again, if you keep on attacking as a batting team, well, you've got more chance of being bowled out for 100, which is embarrassing, humiliating. You've also got more chance of getting the score that you need to win the game, rather than get respectable, in inverted commas, which is you're just sleepwalking to your defeat. And so, test matches, it is interesting how this plays out. I think running between the wickets, there's such a thing. Oh, you should never be run out. But of course, if you're run out if you're run out a bit more in your career, but the price you pay is you get, 50 extra runs per run, for each run out. Well, that is, for most players in history, that is a trade-off that's massively in your favour, because most players average less than 50, for example. But being run out is seen as the height of stupidity and so on, and the kind of thing that will get you really, really attacked. So that potentially is something that teams have been reticent to do. We've seen, so Steve Waugh's Australia they were pioneers after Sri Lanka, but they took it to the next level in terms of how attacking they were with the bat, and it was, in a sense, less risky than it seemed from the outside, because the kind of logic there was these guys are all playing this way in one-day cricket, so why can't they do it in test cricket as well? Obviously there's times when the ball's doing more, it's more difficult, but actually, in general, we do this, and then you find that in return, of course, the opposing teams go very, very defensive, and it means you can then score very quickly. So one of the things I looked at Adam Gilchrist. Obviously, he was one of those players who does change the game. The aggressor as a wicketkeeper batsman. So in his second test, he gets a great 1 for 9 not out against Pakistan to win the test, and he's scoring basically a runner ball. So an amazing innings. And you would expect that innings was, the Gilchrist we know, which was basically smacking the ball to the boundary and out the boundary and stuff. But actually, in that game, I think in that innings, he only hit 13 fours and no sixes, so 52 runs in boundaries, which is quite a small number. And basically, what happens is he scores a flurry of boundaries early on. Pakistan then put a load of sweepers on the load of fielders on the boundary on both sides. He's able to score basically a runner ball without taking any risks, and so the initial flurry of boundaries has then made Pakistan go so defensive that he can then exploit that. And actually, he was then smart enough to realise he could score quickly without taking risks subsequently, which shows how these tactics, when you are a bit brave, they can really work in your favour. But again, there's always the thing of anyone under pressure. Not all failure ultimately is treated equal in cricket. There's failures that annoy people more, and if you're seen as pushing the boundaries, a lot of people want you to fail and kind of take a certain perverse joy in you failing, which is and so I guess England with baseball are trying to challenge that thinking as well a little bit. How successful that will be in history is probably for another day. But there is this instinctive conservatism in not just cricket but in all sports. And I suppose with bowling you probably have a little bit more leeway, but there's still with new deliveries and stuff, there's still often reticence to that. We've seen innovations in bowling that they often come from from teams doing relatively badly and then seeking to find a new way out of their kind of problem. So I guess classic example, West Indies, their fast bowling, their full fast bowlers, that actually comes out of their playing India and Trinidad. India have to 404 to win. They win by 6 wickets. They cruise there. West Indies are bowling spinners, and then they're not proving good enough. And then that leads Clive Lloyd to say, enough's enough. Let's go all out with pace. And then that contributes to an incredible run for West Indies.
When I read the Gilchrist example in your book, I actually thought it's a perfect example to illustrate the point that when you calculate the expected value of something, you take reflexivity into account. So if I try to hit a 6, the expected value is not just calculated by my frequency of getting the 6 and my frequency of getting out, but by also the impact it has on the opposition and how they change the way they play. And if I succeed in hitting that 6, they could set a more defensive field, so then I can take easy singles and the whole game is a different ball game. So that's sort of a fantastic insight. I had Gideon Hay on the show a few years ago, and he was chatting about the 2016 ODI World Cup and saying that what particularly fascinated him about that is that the bowlers were bowling as if they were bowling in a test match, and the batsmen were batting as if they were batting in a T20 game, right? And I found that deeply interesting. So I want you to talk about, and who better than you, because you've written books about all these forms, I want you to talk about how the impact that each of these forms have had on the others, which is inevitably going to be T20 on ODIs and tests and because I would now imagine that with these different forms, the rate of learning about any of these games will be accelerated because you are just getting so much action happening across a variety of circumstances.
No, definitely. So I think it's, I talked about it a little bit earlier. I think post 83 is when you begin to get ODI cricket as a more serious version of the game, and therefore as a version that's having an impact in test matches. And I suppose running between the wicket and aggression with the bat would be the main examples. We also see, a long run trend, but the big improvements of fielding, athleticism, that is, ODIs and T20 both, crucial in driving that. And then, of course, as you get more short form batting more batting influenced by short formats in Test cricket, you then actually begin to see in return a bit more short format bowling tactics. More slower balls and cutters sometimes as a way of disturbing rhythm in Test matches, as opposed to just being used in one days. So there is that dynamic going on. And then just the range of shots, right, from the shorter formats, which then feeds in. And often we talked about, expected rate of return and stuff. Often you get guys who are very, very orthodox, very kind of classical in their upbringing. Suddenly they're playing in, T20 or whatever, and they're so liberated and they're able to score really quickly in a sort of classical way. And then they're like, oh, maybe there is something. And then could they then do that in test matches? And you see that more and more. You've also seen a bit the other way. I think something happened recently where, so about 7-8 years ago in T20, there was a thing of you would use the first over or two of an innings. Often you would bowl, one of your weaker bowlers, and you'd use it as a way to get through a potentially high risk over. You would bowl your fifth or your sixth bowler, so not one of your frontline bowlers. And the over would go for sort of 5 or 6, and it'd be almost a treat, and you'd be like, oh, that's good because we haven't had damage of that. And actually now what's happened is you've had, because it's become so hard to contain in T20, you've actually had a movement away from that, which actually made for pretty drab cricket often. You now actually get test match bowling is used more in T20, where you get bowlers actually who are trying to swing the ball, bowling hard, bowling full, just off, having a couple of slips and really trying to get wickets. You see that more as well in T20, which kind of feeds with Gideon's point, right? So you're seeing, it is remarkable. So the best bowlers definitely do tend to be the best bowlers regardless of format. And even the batsmen, there's not that much difference. You have, I suppose, the role of the power hitter, a kind of a Kieran Pollard, Tim David, Hardik Pandya. That is more of a special, so that's more of a specialist position in the shorter formats. But the kind of correlation between being good at one, really good at Test cricket and good at the others is still massive. And I think the 2023 ODI World Cup final, so 21 of those players have played Test cricket, and 17 of those 22 players were, regulars and very good, very, very good as Test players. So if you're very good at Test cricket, it's generally still a very good base to be really good at the shorter formats, actually.
And what are the trade-offs in terms of skills? Like there are certain things which batsmen can do better, whether it is in playing 360 degrees like AB de Villiers could, or whether it is in playing previously unconventional strokes almost as if they are out of the textbook and with the same kind of ease. But at the same time, while the range of attacking strokes might have gone up, you could also say that hey, they can't play the swinging ball on an overcast day so well. Though, as you point out in your book, whether it is overcast or not has nothing to do with how much is swinging. But that cliche still comes to mind. So in terms of certain skills, when I just look at Indian teams over the ages, if you're playing at Headingley in Leeds and the ball is swinging wildly, I'd rather have Rahul Dravid and Sachin Tendulkar there than any two batsmen of the current team. Where and it is no fault of theirs. They are not necessarily worse batsmen per se. It's just that incentives have led them to cater to a different kind of skill set, given the fact that it is so rare in their career that they'll actually be facing that swinging ball at Headingley, and most of the time they are optimizing for something else entirely. So both in terms of batting skills and fielding skill and bowling skills, we'll come to fielding later. What are the trade-offs that you've seen in that? Yeah, this brings a lot of value to any kind of cricket, test cricket or otherwise, and oh my god, but we have lost that particular skill.
Yeah, so that's I think batting defensive techniques with the bat, I think they probably have declined a bit. In fact, it's not just me. Like there is so the analytics companies who track a batsman's record, batting records when they play certain types of shot. So CricViz and so on. I think they've shown that the frequency of being dismissed when playing a forward defensive has gone up over 15 years or so. So basically, which does actually suggest, which feeds into what intuitively seems right, actually, that in general the capacity to defend has lessened a little bit. So I think that skill has declined a bit, but I think pretty much everything else has improved. I think the game, Test cricket itself, I think as a pure sporting game, I think is better than it's probably more exciting than it ever has been in terms of the range of skills that you can see on offer, and high quality is I think the short formats have basically improved the product of Test cricket as well, encourage more unorthodoxy with the ball and things. And I think the other good thing actually is that as batting has become a bit more aggressive, it's almost become harder to even for a bowling team to contain. So we often kind of get both teams attacking at the same, which can make for very, very compelling Test cricket. So yeah, I mean, I think the capacity to sort of just block out and defend has lessened a bit, which might explain why last 10 years or so we have had quite a lot of collapses kind of from nowhere. So there can be teams can fall over like a stack of cards sometimes, and potentially, I think, just you think of as just what goes into being a batsman, right? Batsmen are more familiar with almost every shot now than they have been before, but they spend less time practicing their defense, across, and then that probably does have an impact in their ability to defend. Of course, if they're smart and think about those trade-offs, actually, it means potentially sort of smart attacking then actually reduces the penalty you pay if you then make a mistake in terms of there's fewer slips in play. So one of the things, not all edges are equal in cricket, right? So if you're bowling to a player who doesn't have a very rounded, who doesn't have a range of shots, you're more to have a third slip than bowling to Adam Gilchrist or whoever. Which means people say, "Oh, Gilchrist is lucky because his edges keep going for four." Well, he's made that luck actually by being such a rounded player that he's built a game where he's less likely to be penalised if he does make a mistake.
Exactly. That's a great point. Let's talk about work ethic and fitness. Like in your book you have you often contrast different kind of pairs and their different kind of approaches. Like Hutton and Compton were so completely different. Compton actually once arrived at the ground late for a test match. You contrast Lilly and Thompson. That Lilly, I think in the first match they played together, the evening before, he sees Thomo drinking what appears to be water but is straight up scotch. So like just different approaches to the game. So someone like Sobers, and I believe this is also true of Gundappa Vishwanath, could just drink all night and party and then come to the game and just make a swashbuckling 100 before lunch. But somebody else had to be totally disciplined. You quote W.G. Grace in your first chapter talking about how discipline was everything to him. So he would make sure he got his sleep. He would make sure that he got to the ground early on the day of the game, and
he'd make his railway trip the day before, not the morning of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's tremendous discipline there. And equally, that seems to be pretty much the default modern approach. You quote one of Kohli's teammates talking about how, Kohli talks about things like BMI and the fat percentage, which no one before him did. So how has that changed through the game? Because on the one hand, you can look at the cavalier geniuses of the past, the Comptons and the Sobers and all of that, not really giving a shit about that and still producing genius. But at the other hand, you could say that number one, you don't know the counterfactual. Maybe they'd have done better if they were more disciplined. And number two, you could argue that there isn't really an option today. The game is played at such a high standard that you have to be at your peak. So give me a sense of, just in terms of fitness and work ethic and the science behind those things, how cricket has changed.
You talked about some of the guys at one extreme of that. Sobers. I mean, I think the 1973 Lord's Test match. He's 31 not out overnight. He then goes out the entire night, comes back at 9 a.m, has a cold shower, and then hits 150. I mean, that is just like so absurd. You can't really. You just, as I say, life's not fair. Some people just have more gifts. Would he have been better without it? Well, a few dimensions to that. I mean, doing this at that sort of behavior, it kind of creates its own legend in real time, and it almost kind of builds up a certain aura around, if you were able to pull it up a bit, that maybe it does actually help you on the field as well, in terms of the oppositions, like this guy is superhuman kind of thing. Although, even actually Sobers, he does, if you look at when he was actually talking about the game, rather than just sort of the bravado, he does talk about his method and everything, and he was, start of his innings, especially, batting in England and the seam of the ball, he's very much trying to eliminate risk at the start of his innings. So there's still a real method there, and he's still very fit. I mean, he's as a kid he's playing all sports and stuff, so he's. It's obviously his metabolism must be fairly extraordinary, but he's still a level of fitness there, like a real level of, and he's also he's just on the field the whole time, because as in he's always doing stuff, because he's this is a multi-dimensional player. He bowls he bats amazingly, he bowls two types of spin, and he swings the ball as well. So he is a completely multi-dimensional, and he's a great fielder. So he's always involved, right? So he's always doing something. I mean, clearly, I think in general there has been a trend towards being more professional, but I think the trade-off for everyone is different, to be honest, because I just think the pressure of and the relentlessness of Test cricket, some people will need an escape from that, and actually having a few drinks probably will actually make them play better if it loosens them up and relaxes them. Otherwise, you can spend your whole time kind of in your room practicing your forward defensive, and not sure that's healthy for most people. Maybe not for anyone, but certainly not for most people. So that trade-off is different. I think you do have a recognition actually from some of the best captains that you need to have certain rules for sure and certain standards, but you need a little bit of flexibility to accommodate different personality types. You're just as Alex Ferguson actually, with Eric Cantona at Man United, he was famously the guy who, he didn't dress code doesn't necessarily apply to him and so on. And actually, when Andrew Strauss was England captain, players really praised him kind of subsequently for actually. He was pretty, you don't want to get the wrong side of him. He was pretty strict in what he demanded, but there was wiggling within that, and there was treating you as adults as well. And I suppose you've had a lot of, teams have gone through different phases with curfews and stuff. And I know now in India there's a debate about families and stuff. And in general, like I think if you're having, you almost shouldn't have to have a policy, right? You should ideally, the players know what they need to do, and they might know that actually for them to be out another hour that night is actually what they need and their interests, and that level of trust is important. I think if you're kind of babysitting guys too much, that is difficult as well. But yeah, some people are built differently, and yeah, Garfield Sobers is one of those who was dealt most of the cards in life, and no, we don't. Yeah, well, most test cricketers can't even imagine what it's like to be dealt that, let alone the rest of us.
Indeed. In your great chapter on Bodyline, you talk about how not everyone in the England team went along with Douglas Jardine. Like Gubby Allen refused to bowl leg theory. The Nawab of Pataudi Senior refused to field as part of the leg side field, and Jardine kind of made fun of them as amateurs and etc. etc. And I want to ask you about that. Nebulous phrase, the spirit of cricket, that and this is something that I wonder about when it comes to literally just about anything. For example, if you look at journalism, you have this duality that on the one hand you can say that we are driven by a certain set of values, we have to afflict the comfortable, comfort the afflicted, always search for truth, but on the other hand you're part of a media outlet, and they have to make a profit, and they have a responsibility to their readers to give them what they want, and etc. etc. And if you look at absolutely any profession, there is always clashes of this sort. And through the evolution of cricket, how does one look at this? Right, on the one hand, you look at the stands that Allen and Pataudi took, and you say that, okay, in that particular case, I agree with them because, hey, Bodyline was clearly pernicious and etc. etc. But quite often it might seem that what you call the spirit of cricket is just a kind of pompous posturing that is happening. The recent sort of controversies over monkading in India, like should you monkad someone, being an example of that, where ponting is like that, hey, you just can't do it, it's against the spirit of the game. And Ravichandran Ashwin, and I have to say I agree with him, says that I'm just going by the rules of the game. You have to go by the rules of the game. Why would you give a non-striker an unfair advantage? So how has thinking on this evolved through the days? And the reason I'm asking is that once upon a time where you didn't select your best 11, where you had amateurs and professionals, and where it was a completely different game, you could look at it in a particular way. But today, when the game is so professional and when the stakes are so high, what role do values play in it? Any kinds of values, whether it's values in terms of a cricketing rule like monkading, or whether it's values in terms of do we play South Africa or not, or do we play the apartheid regime or not, rather. What role do values play in it? What role does individual sort of conscience play in it? So what is your sense of how thinking on this has evolved through the decades?
Well, I think so. The idea of spirit of cricket has been one of those concepts. Again, it's very establishment concept that has been used and probably abused in a kind of convenient way, because lots of people would have said Bodyline was contrary to the spirit of cricket, but that the MCC did not see it that way. And then Mankading whatever is a huge row, and so it's quite odd. For me, I'm always I don't really like the concept of the spirit of cricket, to be honest. I see you. This is a serious sport, and I just think if you have grey, you lend it to, you create these kind of awkward areas, right? And of course, you want to see good spirit between players. You want to see, I think, so it's treating opponents with level of respect. That is, I guess, that is for me kind of the spirit of cricket, if there is one. But I like, with Mankading and stuff, if you stick within the laws, you never have a problem. And so for me, I'm very much on that side of it. And I think as cricket has become more professional in terms of its administration and the stakes, frankly, the financial stakes have increased, we are seeing a big move towards things being more codified and less of these ambiguities and this confusion and stuff. And I remember when Ian Bell was run out against India a few years ago, interesting, when he kind of thought it was tea, but it wasn't, and kind of thing. I think all those kind of things. I think in general, I think we'll have less of these spirit debates. I hope we'll see, because I find them quite tedious actually. And I think in general players will stick more within the laws, and that will be simpler. Again, a kind of American approach. So you have seeding a base in America is almost like the equivalent of in baseball, equivalent of a mank or whatever, but it's just, you can run them out, whatever. That's all fine. You can, that's all part of the game. And I think this nebulous concept, has been quite damaging, actually quite damaging for cricket at times. And I think it just in terms of where it stems from, it very much stems from the early development of Test cricket and kind of who had the keys to the power, really.
There's an amusing anecdote in your book about how Jim Laker, after he takes 19 wickets, actually on the way home, he stops at a pub in Lichfield or Lichfield, whatever it's called. He stops at a pub and he treats himself to a sandwich and a drink, and no one freaking notices. The whole pub is full of people talking about the match, and no one notices that Jim Laker, who just took 19 minutes, is right there. And that got me thinking about the nature of celebrity and how it has changed, and how that can be a challenge for modern cricketers. Like, you also quote Benno talking about commentary in those days and saying silence is your greatest weapon. Don't speak unless you can add to the picture. And equally, I've had television commentator friends of mine who have told me that their brief from the broadcaster is literally the opposite. That there should be no silence. You have to fill up every moment of silence. That is literally their brief. They are supposed to do that. And therefore, we live in an age where everything is, there's hyperbole everywhere, and the pressures of celebrity are intense. You know, when people fail in an important match, at least in India, their houses can get stoned by mobs, and they're not even home, their mother's home, but their house is getting stoned somewhere. And it's crazy. And back in the day, you would not have to deal with this. But today, I think it's increasingly a little bit of, it's increasingly a great challenge. Like, I once asked, I think, Harsha Bhogle, when he was on my show, about the difference between India and Pakistan, in the sense that, and this was really in the 90s and 2000s, a period we were talking about, that Pakistan would keep throwing up these young geniuses who would do something amazing for a test or two and then completely vanish, and why the hell was that? And his theory was that most of the Indian cricketers who were making it in those days were from solid middle class backgrounds, like a Dravid and a Tendulkar and a Lakshman and a Ganguly. So they were sorted, they could take it. While Pakistan didn't really have a middle class, they had a small elite, and otherwise they had largely a lower middle class. And the kids who would suddenly be elevated might have all the talent in the world, but they didn't have the other tools they would need to counter the celebrity and the expectations and etc. etc. And they would kind of fall apart there. And in this modern age where cricketers are expected to be on Instagram as well, where they are trolled for the smallest dropped catch, etc., etc., how does that change the equation? Because I imagine when you look at players of the past, till up till maybe 20-25 years ago, outside of the cricket field, they're living human lives. Whereas today, it's like you're in a fishbowl all the time. What's your sense of this?
Yeah, and I think we forget almost how rapidly that's changed in a kind of grand historical context of history of Test cricket. Through India concepts, Sunil Gavaskar, so his first series to the West Indies in 1971, when he gets his 700 runs, is kind of absolutely legendary series. Well, that whole feat, there was on Doordarshan, there was 26 minutes of highlights of the entire tour, not only from him but from the entire tour, full stop. And you can contrast that with being able to watch every ball, and not just in live, but again and again replayed endlessly. So even between Gavaskar and Tendulkar, in that sort of a 15-year period between their peaks, really, there is a complete shift, and so Tendulkar comes in. He is like no one in cricket's ever seen that before, and even Bradman, obviously so famous, ubiquitous, but people would not actually, not everyone is recognizing him, because they don't, there's something about seeing someone on TV, actually they feel more real than seeing photographs of them and stuff. And obviously the photographs wouldn't always have been of modern quality and stuff. So that has become, in cricket, that has become so much more of a thing. And obviously you have things like player social media, Instagram, and stuff. So I think for players, that is a whole new challenge. I mean, a lot of players aren't on social media deliberately to give themselves a break, release, right? That's a difficulty. And actually, I suppose in writing this book, actually, so New Zealand's always interested me in terms of how they're the smallest of the full member countries, done so well in the last 15, 20 years or so. Of course, the World Test Championship final in 2021, the inaugural one, they beat India with a fantastic game and stuff. So that was an interesting story. And from the outside, you always like, they have so few people. It's kind of a miracle, and in some ways it is. But actually, in terms of researching this book and just your project, actually, I was aware of like the flip side, the positive side, which is that New Zealand, you don't have, it's all very, very normal there. Kane Williamson, a great batsman, but his life, he earns a lot less than if he was Indian, but his life is so much more chilled as well, and the pressure, and so there's a bit of a more sense of this is a normal game and stuff, and it's probably easier for New Zealand players for their test matches to feel like an extension of their domestic matches and so on. So there's actually real advantages of being a smaller country and just not being anything like as famous and stuff. And so that obviously in Indian context is a different level for players to deal with, and is kind of not going to. That trend is not going to change, right? You just have, more digital world and everything, and everything's more ubiquitous and stuff. So that is, yeah. And so in terms of what goes into being a great player in cricket, like the actual physical mechanics of being great as a batsman or bowler or whatever, like they're obviously, the most important part, but they're like, if they're a condition, they're a necessary, but they're not sufficient as a condition. So you can't deal with all the outside noise, then you're going to struggle as well, actually. And I think that's more true now than there's ever been before as well, because that outside noise becomes so much greater.
Let's talk about another aspect in which cricket is different from many other sports, which is the role of the captain. Like in football, the captain isn't really that important. Sure, you can be an inspiring figure, but you can have different leaders on a pitch. You might have, if you look at Liverpool, you might have Salah in front, or you might have Virgil van Dijk at the back, marshalling the back line. But by and large, they are not as critical as a cricket captain is, because cricket is not a continuous flowing game. It's a series of set pieces, and every set piece is something that the captain can say something about. He's changing the bowlers, he's setting the field. There's a much greater part being played there, and obviously we see many captains make their appearance in your pages. There is the 39-year-old Mike Bradley taking over from Ian Botham. There is Ranatunga, who almost went on a rebel tour and counted himself out of later test cricket, but he didn't go on the rebel tour, and instead he's captaining Sri Lanka when Murli is called for chucking, and he supports Murli wholeheartedly, and thank God for that, because a different captain might have dealt with it in a really different way. So give me a sense of how the role of the captain has evolved, because once upon a time the idea was that you pick your best 11 and then you make one of them the captain, or you pick your best 11 plus a couple of players who don't really belong there but they're professional or white, and you make one of them the captain back in the day. But now it almost seems like, as in Brearley's case, Brearley was practically a specialist captain in a manner of speaking, no disrespect intended. So how does one sort of think about this and the importance of the captain? And in a country with as much diversity as, say, India, the captain has an even more important role, because you've got a diverse dressing room and you've got another man management role to play out there. But what is your sense of how this has evolved through the course of Test cricket?
Well, Australia's certainly been where this dynamic is simplest, and it has been the closest to just pick the best team, and then from there you're picking the captain. So, and then in other countries, you've had a whole series of dynamics at work. We haven't really talked about actually the batting v bowling divide in captaincy yet, which very much interplays with the other aspects, because batsmen tend to be from more privileged backgrounds than bowlers in general, really across every cricket country. So you have a big almost taboo where you have a real lack of bowlers as captain historically, and it's always said the bowlers they need someone who is more of a thinking person and who's more detached from the process and everything. But then it turns out actually when bowlers are captains, they tend to do really well. I mean, Pat Cummins down for Australia is just doing terrifically as a captain, and he's barely missed a test as captain either. So you don't. Yeah, it turns out that being a batsman doesn't give you a superpower. In fact, Imran Khan argued that being a bowler actually massively strengthened. He was obviously an all-rounder, but yeah, he was a great bowler. And he said being a bowler massively improved his captaincy, because rather than being a captain, you could just say just bowl it on a good length. So as a bowler, he could actually say maybe you should do this with your wrist or whatever, and actually gives more of a sense of what it's like to be a bowler and have your plans not going as you wanted. Although we also have this perennial debate with bowler captains about how much do you bowl yourself. So historically, some have, Railing with England seemed to underbowl himself, didn't actually bowl himself a great deal. You've had some bowlers who bowl themselves too much. So Andrew Flintoff, when he was standing as captain, he injured himself really because he bowled 50 overs against Sri Lanka, just kept on pounding in. So that's a challenge for bowlers and captains. But then the flip side of that is actually, as a bowler captain, if you're often the best bowler in the team, so actually knowing when's the best time for you to bowl and you can be used most effectively. Well, if you do that in a dispassionate way, that should actually improve your team, because actually, although we revere the batsman in Test cricket, the most important factor in how good your team is how good your bowling is. And basically fast bowling throughout history is the biggest determinant of how good your team actually is. And it flips like that. Sachin Tendulkar is a great example of the flip side of that. So away from home, he only wins one of his first 44 Test matches, and this is probably during Tendulkar's absolute peak, and he's playing all these great innings. But because the bowlers aren't doing the job, then those performances are going in vain. And if you'd bowl to the same level as Tendulkar for a long period, even if the rest of the team are not doing very well, you're probably winning 7 or 8 matches kind of off your own, with your own arms, kind of thing, and so that is the that's the difference in those dynamics. And so and captaincy, obviously, we've had this odd preference for batsman captains, and it'll be interesting to see if that persists actually, with Pat Cummins doing very well. We had Tim Southey, New Zealand as well, so it might be that we get to an era where that's less of an issue either way in terms of determining who is actually the captain. But yeah, just to kind of finish off your question, it is a unique role because football, the captain is almost a ceremonial position. You don't really, there's kind of not a lot that you can't do. If you're not captain, you can still be a leader, and of course you can still in some ways be a leader in cricket, but you don't physically tell the bowler that he's bowling. Then that is the thing, you're making those strategic decisions all the time. And so there's that dynamic element, and you're reacting on the fly and stuff. So it's a lot to compartmentalize. And I suppose actually one of the interesting questions is how much will the role of the coach change that? We've had coaches from the late 80s. Australia were the first kind of modern to have, the first team to have what we think of as a modern coach, and coaches, they have played an important role. But I don't think there's any real sense of them usurping the captain. So the captain really is a unique role almost across sport in terms of, they are obviously as a player so important, but that strategic element, in terms of they're probably doing, they're probably at least as important as the coach in general. So they're doing all the strategic stuff and the man management stuff as well, plus actually, maintaining their performance. So it's a lot to do, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's a fabulous stat in your book that out of the 18 men who've captained in 50 test matches, they're all batsmen except Dhoni, and one could argue Dhoni is also a batsman basically. So which just illustrates exactly what you said. Let's double click on the role of the coach a little bit more, because one thing that we have had is that until the 80s and the 90s, certainly your coach was basically just like the manager of the team. It was some senior player who was coming along for the ride, and I forget who it was. Was it Shane Warne who said the only kind of coach I like is the one that takes me into the hotel from the airport or whatever?
Yeah. Classic Warne. Yeah, Warne Buchanan was a clash.
And but since the late 90s, we've had a bunch of coaches like Buchanan, Bob Woolmer, John Wright, Duncan Fletcher, Andy Flower, Gary Kirsten, who have played a more sort of prominent role in terms of strategy and tactics and using data and setting the direction of events, and some would even argue in Buchanan's case with the rise of the strike rate, even changing the direction of cricket. How much of this is sort of us going too far on the great man theory because we like to personalize everything and make heroes out of people who just happen to be there? But in the sense, surely a lot of these changes would have happened anyway, and how much of it is actually the right coach at the right time, managing to make the needle move?
So I think what's happening, I think the rise of sort of TV and video footage, you actually need a coach now to be in charge of that. Not that they're necessarily going to be one going through the footage themselves, but to be a kind of a central hub for where that information is being fed, and then deciding what then gets fed to the players. Because obviously you only want to give the players a tiny bit of info that's very, very selective. You don't want to overwhelm them, but you need the coach to kind of be on top of it and good strategic coaches can have a real impact in terms of how to get players out. It's always said that impact of coaches on the skill of players at international level is quite small, because at that level they should be skilled enough already. But you do get coaches. You get, Duncan Fletcher was instrumental in helping England players in how they played against spin, for example. So they can have an impact on multi dimensions. Of course, the coaches also, in the kind of media age, right? They're also a figurehead, and with Brendan McCullum and stuff with England, they are actually they have an important role as a conduit to the media, and therefore to the whole outside world. They are just as a manager as in football, the kind of the spokesperson for the team, and that's happening more and more. And actually, good coach, actually, you'd want them to take on quite a lot of media responsibilities and stuff themselves, which kind of to protect their captain, who's got to do so much else themselves. But no, I mean, so Andy Flower as England coach, he's very instrumental, and he has this great partnership with Andrew Strauss, which is really about bringing a bit more structure and discipline to the team, and quite a methodical way of playing cricket. It's definitely not baseball. It's about building pressure with the ball. The theory of bowling 4 maidens in a row will then bring a wicket, that kind of thing, and then with the bat very much setting up top 3, then setting up for the middle or to come. And there's also a sense, Flower is also big on the fitness aspect as well. So they are important. John Buchanan is like, I think you could ask 100 people about John Buchanan, you get 100 different answers. To be honest, I've given a sense of the range of him, and actually, he clearly is very intense, very demanding. But Justin Langer says about people, about whom people would use some of the same adjectives. But Justin Langer, he says actually he helped us to unleash fine extra levels and stuff, and that his depth of planning actually, and actually in 2004 in India is probably when it shows the best. So India, Australia lose in 2001 in India. You have the miracle test in Kolkata, Eden Gardens, and then India win the series 2-1. And Australia actually do take, they evaluate their, they're obsessed with the final frontier. They call it obsessed with winning in India, and Buchanan is instrumental in Australia coming back to India with a slightly less aggressive approach. Actually, we talked about the positives of aggression earlier, but they actually think they didn't have enough of a plan B, a fallback option. So they're about, and then they lead this plans to bowl much drier in India, but basically find a way to protect the boundaries and close off the revenue, the regular source of runs. So actually, maybe you have a slip through and stuff, and you have these short catches and things, and you're choking off the supply of runs, and that works really, really well. So no, I think coaches are important players. I think the coach varies in each team, and they're kind of often linked to the captain. So you have South Africa become world number 1 with Graham Smith and Mickey Arthur as a captain-coach partnership. But Mickey Arthur's job is very much to support Smith. That he is he's backing up the captain more than being a kind of independent driver himself. I think, which works brilliantly for that team. So it's not criticism. It's an observation that a coach's role is, and their power is linked to the captain and what works. So there's very much not a one size fits all model, as maybe as shown with Arthur when he goes to Australia and he really struggles, and his role just doesn't work at all there.
There are about a few thousand things I'd like to double click on which are in your book, but I'd rather that everyone listening to this actually pick up the book, because it's such a pleasure to kind of soak into it. Each of the 35 chapters is great and could actually have been a book on its own. So, why don't you write 35 more books? But I'll sort of end with 3 final questions, and the first one could either be easy or tough, but you must have done this already a million times. Give me an all-time England Test 11.
Wow! So just England, and this is just on the pitch. No,
actually, I'll leave the choice to you, or either an England Test 11 or just an all-time World 11, whatever you prefer. Give me an 11 and give me your reasons.
I'll go for World. Am I picking my favorite team or the best team?
Your favorite team with your reasons.
Okay. I'll open with, so this is not my best 11 players. This is just, okay, I'll open with Victor Trumper and Jack Hobbs. So Trumper is so one of the kind of, in terms of how we watch cricket, one of those amazing nuggets actually that found out is Trumper still scores faster per hour than any player in Test match history. So obviously that was function that he scored very quickly, and B, there were more overs per hour ball then. But if you're going to a game, you're not really counting the balls, but you are thinking, oh my god, it's been 2 hours, he's got 100 and stuff, and it kind of embodies the golden age. I think Trumper, I'll go with Trumper, and Hobbs is one of those.
Which Hobbs? Part 1 of Hobbs or part 2 of Hobbs?
Well, so the beauty of Hobbs is that there's 2 parts, right? Which is true of very few great players. I mean, part 1 of Hobbs is he's the more adventurous, more enterprising version, and he says after the war they start printing the averages and everything it's all the accountants kind of take over and stuff. So it's a measure of his greatness that he was fantastic in both eras. But Hobbs 1 is more exciting, and he's also this. Because he captains England, albeit like he's on the pitch and he stands as captain rather than he's named captain, but he actually is important in breaking that taboo in terms of being a professional, and he gets what's seen as the highest praise possible at the time, which is he's described as a professional who bats like an amateur. So Hobbs, which says a lot about England, right? But so I'll go with Hobbs as well. 3, I might actually stick with Ranji here at 3. I just think the way he opens up the onside is amazing. I just think how we watch cricket today is shaped by him. I think it speaks for himself. I'll sit with Ranji at 3. Oh god, now it's getting very difficult. I'm going to avoid my childhood debate by picking them both. I'm going to go with Tendulkar 4 and Lara 5. Both of whom I was lucky enough to talk to as part of this project, which is amazing. I think Tendulkar, we talked about the eras thing with Hobbs, actually. Tendulkar, you could say there was almost 3 eras, because he starts off in the kind of the era of, West Indies, all the quicks and stuff. There's then the very bowler-friendly era in the 90s, where you have a combination of these great quick bowlers, and of course he has to face Warne and Murali, and he then kind of gets his reward at the end, which is then he has this great batting era towards the end of his career. So actually, we talk about averages. Tendulkar towards the end has an amazing average, but actually the best Tendulkar is actually in the mid late 90s, when over averages are much less. So he's actually standing out by a lot more relative to the competition. 200 Test matches is pretty absurd, and one of the best players ever of fast bowling, particularly, you'd have to say, and incredible. And Lara, actually, who I'll go number 5, I think maybe the best ever player of spin bowling. So a nice compliment there. We talked a lot about upbringing and how it shapes. So Lara explained to me that from Trinidad, that isn't a part of Caribbean, but partly because the history of Indian indentured labour and even things like the soil type. So you have a lot of spin bowling there, and also in kind of wind ball cricket there. At times, spinners are allowed to bowl with imperfect actions and things. So all this develops Lara's game against spin, and he played, my all-time favourite Test innings, which is 1 for a 3 not out against Australia in 1999. West Indies went by 1 wicket, chasing 308. And he, at 5 a.m. that morning, he told me about how he was visualising the whole innings in his head before he actually played it. Very much trying to see off the pace bowlers, and then going very hard against their spinners. They had Shane Warne and Stuart McGill, there's actually great footage of that innings on YouTube. Actually, it's kind of been remastered recently, and it is so incredible. I'm going to go with
just interrupt. That was one of the most fun parts of the book to read, because you describe on how the previous night he calls his friend to come and sit with him, and they watch old clips together, and then he comes up with this tactic that I'm going to see the fast bowlers out, and then I'm going to attack Warne and McGill only so that the fast bowlers have to come back before they've had time to rest, and then I'm going to take them to the cleaners. And that kind of thinking is pretty incredible. And once again, while attacking Warne and McGill, had he gotten out, everyone would have criticized him for being too aggressive, except that, hey, there's a plan there, and he's worked it all out and he's visualized it. So I love that chapter, but sorry, please continue.
Because he's saying that like McGrath is the main threat, but the way to neuter him as a threat was not to attack McGrath, but to attack the others, to make McGrath bowl when he's only 80% physically. So it just showed the layers of thinking. There is so much going on here. So that was amazing to kind of deconstruct how you played such a great innings, and it's a lot more. Obviously, it's unbelievable just the stroke making, but there's a lot layers and layers on top of that. So that was a real joy to talk to him as well. Number 6, I think we'll, I'm not going to overthink it. I think we'll go with Sobers. I just think as just a joke of a cricketer, quite frankly. We talked a bit about the off the pitch stuff, but just the spell. I mean, he averages 58 with the bat. He opens the bowling. He bowls orthodox spin. He bowls wrist spin. He's an incredible fielder. Just a complete freak of a cricketer. I think hard to overlook. 7. This is a 2. I don't want to choose between actually 2. Yeah. Contrasting but great keeper batsmen, Andy Flower and Adam Gilchrist. There's something, there's something really heroic about Andy Flower. The being, I think, is unique in terms of being world number 1 in the worst team in the world. I mean, it's such an amazing thing to achieve, and the kind of bloody mindedness. I mean, there's a game in against South Africa. He gets 152 and 199. Sorry, 142 and 199 not out in the match, batting at 5 and keeping wicket, and they still lose by 9 wickets. And it's like you really couldn't have done any more. He's been on the field for like 26 hours in the Test matches. Like, an amazing. And he talked about his story of how he became number 1. So he got sacked as captain, was very very angry about that. Writes number 1 in the middle of a sheet of paper. Writes all the things he needs to do to get to that level, and it ends with him. Basically doing recording to himself how he's going to watch the ball really closely, and then so it can feel like he's slowing the ball down in its flight, and it'll be easier for him to hit. And he's listening to. Then he basically does self-hypnosis. He listens to this on an old school Walkman in his bed, and his wife's like, "I'm trying to get some sleep here," kind of thing. That was there's something quite heroic about it. I mean, George Headley was another figure earlier who was similar level. Well, the kind of sense of being as a bat, his country's, his side's bet, almost first and only hope. So Flower v Gilchrist is very hard, and maybe we should go for Flower for balance, not to let the Aussies have everything, right? And then last 4, I will go for Murali as one of my bowlers. He won't bat 8. I should add, but Murali will be there, and just I think he's the most valuable player in Test cricket history in the sense of like adding wins for his country that they would not otherwise have had. And he's just getting 6 wickets a Test is unbelievable, and actually so good at his record in England, South Africa, New Zealand is unbelievable, and just the amount he's bowling, he's 2 players, and he's worth 2 players inside. I just think. And also, what he was up against in terms of the accusations of throwing, when actually what they found was basically they looked at guys like McGrath who had a sort of pristine action, and they found that actually everyone was throwing. So that's, you brought something to the cricket, and you found that almost everyone had a bit of flex in their thing, which is what in their actions, which is why they moved to 15 degrees being permitted, because this sort of idea of a completely perfect action, actually no one was achieving that. I'll go for Murray as one of the bowlers. I will also go for I think reverse swing deserves to be there. I think Wasim Akram as a exponent of reverse swing is really unbeatable. And it's a left arm who can bowl 90 miles an hour, and obviously amazing with the new ball, incredible with the old ball, and a very useful dangerous hitter down the order. So he can be my number 8. I'd like to have a West Indies quick. I will maybe go for Curtly Ambrose. I think was probably my favorite. I think the kind of something very formidable. The way that people always had a sense of he was would often be on site with himself, but there was a sense there was more to be unleashed and stuff, and a kind of just a sheer mastery of that length. He would bowl again and again. You kind of that in between length, and moving the ball off the seam, and from that great height, just unbelievably difficult ball to face, and a lovely guy to chat to as well. So that leaves one pick. If we can let Sobers do more focus more on his seam bowling, then we can have Warner that finishes us off roundly, and we have both Warner and Murali to avoid only having one.
Marvelous. What a team. Awesome. That was fun, wasn't it? So, all right. My penultimate question is that, you know, these are times of such great change. You've written a book on the history of a form of the game which many would argue is archaic, it's an anachronism, it may not even survive. Is there a logic for it to survive? You and I would love to see it survive, but do we watch enough of it to be able to say that without being hypocritical? I think it's your job, so you do. I don't think I do. But yeah, I mean, just like opera, we should, and Shakespeare plays, we should find a way to watch more T20 cricket so that Test cricket stays alive. But here's my question. If I ask you to look 15 years into the future, and I'm not asking for a prediction, but if you look 15 years into the future and you think of 2040, what is, what is the best case scenario you see for cricket, and what is the worst case scenario?
So just to take a step back, writing this book, one of the reoccurring themes, people love to say Test cricket is about to die. People have been, even during the golden age, they were saying people aren't watching anymore, too long and stuff. Players are playing for money now. They're not playing for the badge on the shirt anymore and stuff. So these things keep on reoccurring. So that is it. The fact it's lasted for so long does tell you that this is, it survived for a reason. It's worth something. It's potentially worth something beyond the financials and stuff. I also think, on balance, if someone had offered you Test cricket today in 2010, 15 years ago, people would probably be pretty content actually with where it is now, which is not to say it's not got a heap of problems, but the last 15 years, incredibly, really, we've gained countries rather than lose them and things. We have a structure now of sorts. The World Championship for me is very flawed, but very important. And so to fast forward 15 years, for me, the World Championship is actually so important, because that is, I think, the best solution to give all countries, not just Australia, England, India, a sense of pinnacle to aspire to, as you had, when Kane Williamson lifted the first trophy. A sense, you want every country to have an aspiration, just like with the World Cup. Everyone can see there's a pathway for them to win it. If you play well enough, it's all and you need that in Test cricket as well. So the best case is actually the World Test Championship is really established and is a better system than it is now. And my proposal actually is so you currently have the World Test Championship has 9 teams. You each play 6 series, but it's a very complicated. You play different length series, and it's comes down to points, percentage of points contested, which is a mouthful and is a nightmare. So for me, the solution is to have each series in the World Test Championship be 3 matches each of 4 days each, which will help with the cost and scheduling. 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw. Very transparent, fair system. You can play extra matches in Australia, England, India that are outside the structure. That's fine. But the series themselves, the count for the WTC, everything is 3 matches times 4 days each. Very simple. And the top team goes to the final. 2v3 has a playoff to get to the final, which is we played a week before. And I think actually you do that. That's 18 tests every 2 years guaranteed for teams, albeit in the 4-day format. And I think it's a great outcome, but it's also not utopian. Like, I think you can do that with 3 windows a year of 3 weeks each, right? So that's 3 months a year would be enough, and then you have the rest for other forms of cricket. So I think that's a good solution, a really good solution that's not utopian, that is actually plausible. I mean, to get there, you need better administration, you need kind of joined up thinking, and a bit of the sense of this thing is actually worth protecting, even if it means using some T20 money and stuff. And you need to have windows as well. So you need to have these windows when there's no other cricket, and this is just like you have in football. You have international football, international windows and stuff. So you need so a South African or New Zealand player will not be able to play in the league earning more money during the Test cricket, because Test cricket will be the only thing they can play at that time. And the other thing actually, which would that allow us to do, is have more matches at the same time, which actually add a real narrative to Test cricket, which we haven't seen that much historically. But sometimes you get Boxing Day tests, you have 3-4 tests at the same time. Actually, it's a really nice feeling. And if the Test Championship is to gain, and it's England might need New Zealand to beat India to get to the final, so they're actually cheering on New Zealand against India, and that adds a narrative as well, and just gives more points of interest. So that would be my best outcome. Probably won't get there, but I don't think it's utopian to think.
That's a ceiling. What's a floor?
A floor is a good question. A floor is 5 or 6 countries playing. Everyone else has given up. you have the kind of Australia, England, India play almost like you have like the Ryder Cup in golf or something, where you have these series that play against each other, and then they play occasionally. They might play South Africa or New Zealand as like a warm up kind of thing to those main series, but it's very much like it's on a path to almost being 3 countries only. I think that is the worst case, the floor. Yeah. So the floor is not Test cricket dies, because the Ashes and Border Gavaskar, frankly, make so much money that's not dying anytime soon. The floor is administrators just can't be, through lack of interest and sort of sense of powerlessness and just kind of a lack of smart thinking. The flaw is they just cannot find a way to make Test cricket, vibrant beyond 3 countries, which would be a real shame in my view.
Ditto, agree with that. My final question for me and my listeners, recommend to us books, films, music, any kind of art at all that you love and that means the world to you. Throw in some cricket books in there, but it doesn't have to be just cricket, but just stuff that brings you joy.
Wow, lovely question. So we'll start with a bit of cricket books. I think Pundits from Pakistan from Rahul, we talked about earlier, one of my favourite books on cricket. So that would be, as a kind of cricket book to recommend, that would be right up there. Beyond cricket, very tricky. I read a novel called Homeland by Fernando Aramburu, which is a kind of Basque novel. That was a terrific book that I read recently. I loved Levels of the Game. It's a piece of sports writing by John McPhee, which was he used a US Open match as a window to write about these 2 players. Arthur Ashe was one, and the whole world, and the kind of world of tennis and the world beyond tennis. And it's very skillful to be able to and pull it off to use one feature as a prism to do a lot more. So that's a book. That's a book I really enjoyed. Any more you want?
Films, music, whatever gives you joy. I'm sure many things give you joy.
I watch a lot of Alfred Hitchcock films, Rearview Window, stuff like that. Psycho, not sure that gives you joy, but that was hell of a. I really enjoyed watching a thing called State of Happiness Now, which is very good. About what happens when a small village in Norway discovers loads of oil and loads of Americans come in. That's a nice one I'm watching at the moment. Yeah.
Tim, thanks a lot, man. You've given me a lot of your time. And of course, you spent much more time writing this awesome book, which everyone listening to this is instantly going to buy right now and read. So thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. A real pleasure to be on. And yeah, thank you for indulging me for so long.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, check out the show notes, enter rabbit holes that will go to your nearest bookstore, online or offline, and pick up every book by Tim Wigmore, especially Test Cricket, A History. It's a great read. You can follow Tim on Twitter at TimWig. You can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AmitVarma. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in and every podcast app of your choice. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.